This week on Best Known For, hey, this is how they laugh in the future. Ah! Ah! That's right. We're talking about Blue Valentine, 2010's Blue Valentine. Hello and welcome to Best Known For. I'm your host, Sean Morgan. I'm here with my co-host, Ryan Turf. I apologize if I peaked my microphone and blew out your eardrums. This is a podcast about movies, but we are also about science and truth. If you go to an actor's IMDb page and look at their known for section, how often do those four projects there actually represent that performer and what the public actually loves them for? Well, we aim to answer that question. In each miniseries, Ryan and I will choose an actor, and we will take their known for movies on IMDb, plus 3 individual picks from each Ryan and myself. The goal is that after breaking down those 10 films, Ryan and I will determine what that actor's Mount Rushmore truly should be, aka that actor's best known for, F-O-U-R. Get it?
Clever.
Yeah, so we begin with the man himself, Ryan Gosling. We've recorded 2 episodes already on The Notebook and Half Nelson. The known for on Gosling's IMDb at the time that we locked in the series is Blue Valentine, La La Land, Drive, and The Notebook. I myself threw into the mix Half Nelson because of the Gosling Oscar nomination, Blade Runner 2049, which I think is one of the best movies in recent memory and probably one of the best legacy sequels ever made. And I also threw in Barbie because I think that movie's a lot of fun and it's another Gosling Oscar nomination. Ryan, say hi to the people, Ryan.
Hello again.
He has chosen to throw into the mix First Man, The Nice Guys, and Crazy Stupid Love. So we have not yet gotten to any of the films that you personally picked. We're going in chronological order. So first up was The Notebook. Gosling's known for on IMDb have kind of changed a little bit here and there depending on the day when we've looked at it. But at the time we locked in, The Notebook was there as opposed to Lars in The Real Girl. However, a film that has not really moved to my memory every time we've checked is Blue Valentine, which consistently seems to be in Gosling's known for on IMDb. So between the 3 films that we've done so far, Blue Valentine is the third. We did The Notebook, which is 2004, Half Nelson, which I think is 2006, and then this Blue Valentine, a little bit more of a time jump. 2010 is when this movie was released to the public, and it's kind of an interesting film in that, at least to me, I've always thought of it growing up as like a staple of Gosling's filmography, even though I'd never seen it until you and I agreed to do this podcast. I guess I'll open with my personal pre-existing relationship with the film, and then I'll ask you about yours. I didn't really have one. Blue Valentine was always, I guess, growing up as like a budding cinephile. This came out in 2010, so I didn't see it in theaters. It was rated R. I was maybe like 12 or 13 when this movie came out. So
Right.
I was not at the age where like this, as much as I was getting interested in movies, this was not one that like appealed to me even then, just because I was, a tween boy. And then as I grew up, it was always just kind of out there in the ether because I knew that there was this movie called Blue Valentine that people seemed to like, and Williams was nominated for an Oscar for it, and I'd never seen it until now. And then also, interestingly enough, as like a budding cinephile growing up, there's that period where you're like, okay, I don't know if you had this experience, but growing up when you decide, okay, movies are one of my things. Movies are a thing that I really like. How do I dip my toes into this medium past, the things that you seek out initially as like a teen boy who gets into movies, right? Your Pulp Fictions, your Dark Knights, etc., right? Once I start broadening my horizons past that, what should I be looking for? So in my mind growing up, I had conflated in my head, for whatever reason, maybe just based on similar titles alone, in my head swirling around was always Blue Valentine, My Bloody Valentine, which came out the year before this,
Oh no.
and Blue Velvet, which of
Oh
course is like
no.
an iconic David Lynch film that I have seen since and really love because I'm a big
Eh.
David Lynch guy. I'm a big David Lynch guy. I did not say that you had to be. Don't fucking sigh at me at the top of the episode. So I'd never seen this movie. I was excited to watch it. I really like Ryan Gosling. I'm a little bit more hit or miss with Michelle Williams, which maybe will come up throughout the course of the episode. It's so not personal. I just want to get that out of the way. Like, I think everyone probably has this. I'm sure you have an actor or actress like this where like I can't deny the talent on display because the individual, in this case Williams, is so like well regarded, well respected, nominated several times for Oscars, but
Sure.
like something about the major not the majority. Something about enough of her performances just fails to connect with me on an emotional level for whatever cosmic reason, like not even one that I can articulate. That just like she's not as much of a draw for me as she seems to be for a lot of people. Like I'm never someone who's like I have to watch this because Williams is in it. Where I do feel that way about I'm trying to think of a good comparison, like a contemporary of hers. Like um I'm excited. I'm really excited to see Baby Girl, for example, because for as often as Nicole Kidman does these mini series, for example, that I just never get around to, like whenever she pops
Hmm.
up in a movie, I'm like, oh, let me see what kind of Kidman we're gonna get this time. And I don't ever feel that excited about Williams, for example, if that makes sense, just on a personal level for me.
Would you feel that way if Michelle Williams was doing the AMC ads instead of Nicole Kidman?
That's a good question because I do love, as an AMC boy, I do love that ad. Um, I might have a little bit more of an affinity for her if I had that association. That's a good shout. And to her credit, like when she's great, she's great. We'll talk about this movie. I don't think the Oscar nomination is unwarranted. Like even though I have
Agreed.
like even though I just have like there's just like a personal disconnect with me like like personally being super super emotionally invested in every Williams performance. That just doesn't exist for me the way that it does for others. Here I think she is quite terrific. Not to give away my thoughts there. um I think she's really good in Manchester by the Sea. I think she's doing exactly what is asked of her in The Fablemans, even though I have some issues with the tone of that film overall. Like, I think that film achieves exactly the tone that it sets out to achieve, but
Hmm.
it's just not one that I got on the wavelength of throughout the course of the runtime. I have only seen it once, so maybe that would change upon a second viewing. And to be fair, Michelle Williams is sorry about Venom, so that
Ah, you beat me
also
to it.
gets her points. Um, so that was a long walk to the fireworks factory, pun intended. There are some fireworks in this film, literally and figuratively, and
Oof.
over the credits. Um, Ryan, give me your lowdown on Blue Valentine if you had a pre-existing relationship with it, and then we can just dive right in because it's kind of a meaty film. Not a lot of events take place compared to some of these other films in this miniseries, but it is pretty dense in a lot of other ways.
My relationship to the film is similar to yours. I did not see it in theaters. I do remember hearing about it or reading about it. I do remember being aware that it was, getting that awards push that Michelle Williams had been nominated. I remember hearing how sad it was. But as a teenage boy, I wouldn't say this movie piqued my interest at that time. My relationship to Michelle Williams is similar to yours. I don't uh, think of her as one of my favorites, and she doesn't come to mind all that often, but I am surprised looking at her Wikipedia just to be reminded of how many good and or big movies she's in. You mentioned the Venom films. Of course, she was nominated for this film. She was in The Fablemans. Manchester by the Sea, My Week with Marilyn, Oz the Great and Powerful, Shutter Island, and who could forget My Beloved Greatest Showman. So she has been in a
Oh
lot of
God,
movies.
she is in Showman, isn't she?
She is. She's
We'll have to
walking the
talk about.
tightrope
I really don't want to interrupt you, but I have to in this small way.
because you love the movie as well.
No, someday we will have to discuss The Greatest Showman because that film gets under my skin in a way that well, actually, no. A lot of movies get under my skin, but rarely do they get under my skin in the way that The Greatest Showman does. And you, I think, love that film.
Cried at the end.
Yeah.
It's just that
So
beautiful.
someday we will talk about that. But go ahead, continue.
So I do, admire the career that she's carved out for herself. And I think she's phenomenal in this film. So, I'm all for this Oscar nomination. I also, have never seen Dawson's Creek, which is where she, got her big break. And so I do think a lot of people that are fans of her might be slightly older and have a relationship with that show.
She's also in
Um,
a Scream or two, if I'm remembering correctly, or a Halloween, maybe.
yes, I think she's in Halloween H2O.
I remember liking her in that.
Yeah. And I totally forgot she's in Brokeback Mountain too. Yeah, she's had a quietly very impressive career.
Yeah. Before we dive into the breakdown of Blue Valentine, I have two additional questions for you. Well, one, I want to hit you back on: is there a performer, male or female? We don't need to gender it. That
Mm-hmm.
just like is respected, is highly awarded. You recognize objectively that they are in fact talented, but for whatever reason, you just fail to emotionally connect with them many times when they're on screen.
Well, I mean, I guess it's become a running bit now, but as I've said before, Sean Penn is a celebrated actor who I don't often respond to. I'm trying to think of other, celebrated, beloved names. I'm
Penn
sure
is
there
Penn is a
are.
good shout. I mean, I'm sure there are people who agree with you just because they find him personally annoying, but for various reasons. But I don't think I've seen enough of Penn's work to have a strong relationship one way or the other. But I think he's phenomenal in Daddio. I think he's good in Licorice Pizza. He's in Licorice
Mm-hmm.
Pizza, if I recall correctly.
He
Um,
is.
yeah, so I mean, I'm not gonna like come to his defense, but that I generally have a favorable opinion of him.
I have another big one that I'll mention that I was just reminded of. I've never quite. I guess I understand the appeal, but I've never quite been on the same wavelength as Angelina Jolie. I've never been impressed in really any way with anything she's done.
I have yet to see this year's Maria.
Maria.
I'm excited to. I think that I wholly understand some of those. I wholly understand her celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
She is someone who on screen like is just impossible not to watch because she's so I mean, she's just so beautiful. Um and I do find her charismatic. Um but I guess that's a decent point. I have not taken a deep dive into her filmography, but like the early films of hers that I have seen, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, for example, I come away from a movie like that thinking, well, Brad Pitt is acting his butt off because that's just who Brad Pitt is. We will not. I don't want to get into their interpersonal relationship. I'm talking about pure
Right.
acting. Um, and her, I'm like, oh, she's a charming, very attractive, very charismatic person. I don't know that she's acting in the way that Brad Pitt is acting. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
However, I think at this point in her career, she's looking to, if that narrative exists in the minds of more people than just me, I think she's actively making an attempt to kind of reverse that. She's taking more serious, kind of interesting things at this stage in her career, it seems, right? I mean, um,
With the
I'm not,
exception of Eternals, yes.
see, I kind of like her in Eternals, but I also am the one person in America who likes Eternals. So,
You think we'll
Um,
talk about that on the pod at some point?
I hope so, because you know who else likes Eternals? My beloved girlfriend Jessica. We're like the only two people in the world who like uncritically think that movie is plain good. Like without caveats, when we're behind closed doors, we don't have to like worry about the thought police. We can just turn to each other on the couch and go, Eternals is good, right? And not feel embarrassed about it. Um, my second question is this. I'm not familiar with a lot of this director's other films. I know
Mm-hmm.
that The Place Beyond the Pines has some lovers. Um, I have seen The Light Between Oceans. I remember liking it fine. I remember Jessica, my girlfriend, crying like a baby during it.
Mm.
So it clearly worked on her there. Um, I did not see the mini series he that this guy did, Derek Cianfrance. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. He did a mini series with Mark Ruffalo called "I Know This Much Is True."
Mm-hmm.
I think my mom gave it high praise, but I never checked it out. Are you familiar at all with any of his other directorial efforts? There's also a film before Blue Valentine called Brother Tide that I'd never heard about before. But with that, I've listed off all of the director credits on IMDb. Really, do you
Mm-hmm.
have any love for any of those?
I haven't seen any of his other projects. I remember seeing the trailer for The Place Beyond the Pines, and I remember there being a lot of buzz about that movie leading up to the release, and I really wanted to see it, and I never did. And I seriously considered picking it for my three movies, but unfortunately, Gosling just has such a strong lineup that there were other movies I chose to prioritize. But that is a movie that's very high on my watch list. Um, so I would like to explore more of his work. I also love the picture of him online. If you Google him, he looks basically like Gosling in this movie.
I'm so happy you said that because I was gonna say because one of this is a perfect segue because let's get into Blue Valentine. But
Let's do it.
yes, the the wig work or hair or whatever they've done to Gosling in this film, it is the exact same hairline as this director's IMDb photo to like a comically accurate degree. Um,
Mm-hmm.
let's just get into it. I think we've done enough table setting. Um,
Agreed.
so, Blue Valentine, we open on a young girl by the name of Frankie looking for her family's lost dog. We learn that Frankie is the daughter of Dean and Cindy, played by Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams, respectively. I'm going to do my best to choose one or the other between the character names and the actors, but I probably will just use them interchangeably because that's kind of how I talk about movies. So, Ryan Gosling is Dean, Michelle Williams is Cindy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Dean is woken up in his chair. We get to see his distracting hairline, in my opinion. I feel like immediately, immediately, I was like, maybe we could have aged him up in some different way because Michelle Williams looks exactly the same in the past and present, except for like how she does her hair. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I just feel like we could have done something different with Gosling. I get that, like, the cinematic language of the receded hairline helps us associate him with maybe being kind of aimless and maybe being like the drunk uh, blue collar dad. I'm not saying that that's universally uh, accurate or even fair
Right.
to our receding hairline kings out there, but I think the cinematic language I think is that I see this and I'm like, okay, so he's in a little bit of a rough spot, this guy. That's just
Mm-hmm.
what the filmic language says to me. Um,
Yes.
he is immediately kind of very sweet with his daughter. It's a wholesome relationship. It seems he's helping her look for this dog. The two father daughter duo, they go inside and they wake up Cindy, played by Michelle Williams. She's trying to just get some damn sleep. Um, and we see her get out of bed and prepare breakfast for her family. Gosling is playing with Frankie. They're having a grand old time while a kind of quietly frazzled Cindy tries to get things in order for the family's day. There's a brief little kind of tiff between Cindy and Dean because Dean calls her out for like making the oatmeal incorrectly or something. He's not like rude about it, but it's a clever little way for the film to immediately signal that something may be off here. Like couples fight, of course. You and I have both been in relationships before. I'm in a relationship right now. Couples fight,
Mm-hmm.
of course, but the choice to have this be one of their first interactions in the film, I think, is an effective way to imply that maybe
The
some
vibes are not good.
the vibes are maybe a little bit deeper than what one might think just seeing father daughter wife, okay, nuclear family, cool. How do you feel about the opening of the film here?
I think it does a pretty good job of setting up what this movie is going to be. I love the bit where Dean and the daughter go into the bedroom to wake mom up.
they're
It's a
they're playing
classic.
tigers, yeah.
Yeah, it's a classic nuclear family moment where the kid is up and out early trying to wake the exhausted parents up, and instead of turning into a cute game of tiger in bed, um Cindy seems genuinely upset that she's being woken up by Dean and the daughter. So you can tell already she's exhausted. She's maybe not on board with some of Dean's antics. And I think the movie ultimately shows us that in a lot of dark, sad ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like it's not like she's sleepy and groggy for a second and is like, oh, 5 more minutes, and then plays tigers with them instead. Like a more cookie cutter movie might go that route. But
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's a nice bit of realism.
Yeah.
I don't think of it as being like defamatory against Cindy in any real way. Like
No.
she's got, and we also learned that like, she's a medical professional. She should be well rested. um,
Yeah. Probably
um,
working long, tough hours.
yeah. So Cindy leaves to drop Frankie off for school, and Gosling cusses out another driver on the road for driving too fast. Kind of subtle hint that maybe Dean has a little bit of a temper or like general irritability about him. Also, I think foreshadows what we learn. Sorry, spoiler alert, happens to the poor dog of this family. Um, Gosling, between Half Nelson and Blue Valentine, cannot keep a pet alive, it seems. Um, yeah, I mean, this driver is kind of being an ass, but there's some plausible deniability as to like, is Dean rightfully reacting, or is this a hint at maybe something a little more intense that he has going on? Um, I also thought it was interesting that Cindy does not put her seatbelt on, perhaps signaling a disregard for her own safety due to either just general chaos in her life or a dissatisfaction with her life. That may be me projecting because I've seen the film like one and a half times now in preparing for the episode. So I know what ends up happening with this character. Um, but I don't think that's too out of pocket a suggestion given what we learn about her later and her level of unhappiness in her life. Um, we also see Williams printing out some flyers at her job. We cut to Williams at her job. We meet her boss and learn that he is moving his medical practice. He wants her to come along with him, and she has not yet gotten a chance to bring it up with her family, quote unquote, he says, but we're talking about Dean here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where we learn that she is, in fact, a nurse. We see her with an expectant mother, a detail that is also poetic in some respects. We will come to find out.
Nice touch.
Um, yeah, it is a nice touch. Um, and then let me just barrel through to one other bit here, and then I'll let you have the floor. We then also learn what Gosling does for work. He's a painter. We see him driving his truck while drinking what I assume is a beer. Not great, not a smart move.
No.
Um, and then we also cut to Cindy driving, I guess, back from work or leaving work early, where she does, in fact, find the family dog dead on the side of the road. Um, this poor animal does not get a lot of does not get a lot of scenes to really act in this film. Sorry, Sparky, we got you a great role, but you're just gonna have to lay there. But don't worry, you get to work with Gosling. Um, Ryan, what do you think about this further introduction to these two characters?
Yeah, I like the brief conversation they have in the driveway as she's leaving. As you mentioned, she doesn't have her seatbelt on, which I think tracks with her character as we learn more about her. And Gosling asks her about 4 times to put the seatbelt on as she's pulling out, which I think is also representative of Dean's, I think, genuine care for her, and also potentially a overprotectiveness, or
So
and
you're anti seatbelt.
I'm pro seatbelt, but maybe don't say it 4 times very intensely. Um, but it's a good little character moment between them that sets up what's to come. And then, yeah, I was shocked by seeing this poor dog's corpse. Just like Half Nelson, they give you a shot of the lifeless body. And I knew it wasn't going to end well for this dog, but I was surprised that the dog was discovered so quickly. We hardly knew ye.
Yeah, films in the early or mid 2000s and early 2010s, I guess, weren't fucking around. Nowadays,
Mm-mm.
you show a dead dog, threats.
Answered.
You're getting threats off of social media right away. Um, yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad that you made it clear that you were in fact pro seatbelt, though. Um, but yeah, that is a fun detail actually, and it just occurred to me, Michelle Williams not using protection in that scene, possibly foreshadowing
Oh no.
something else later in the movie.
What a
Anyway,
segue.
what a segue. So anyway, we cut to a little bit farther in the day. We see Dean at a 4th of July recital of his daughter, I guess. I don't remember
Is
4th
that
of
what it
July.
is?
They're all singing Yankee Doodle Dandy and wearing red, white, and blue, aren't they?
Yeah, I
I mean,
guess.
I just rewatched a significant chunk of the film today, so to finish up my notes, that's what it seems to be. Um, and I wrote here, I don't remember 4th of July recitals being a thing, but okay, power to
Yeah,
you.
because most people aren't in school in July.
They are. Oh, that's yeah. What is happening here? Maybe it's like a maybe it's like a local community thing.
Could
No,
be, or a
because
summer school
I don't know. Because
daycare.
Williams also gives her daycare. That's what it has to be. Because Williams also gives her like a backpack.
Right.
So like,
She's
I
going
don't.
somewhere for the day.
Yeah, that's it's got to be a daycare. Because you're right. It's July. School's out. Like, what is happening?
Maybe in
Um,
Pennsylvania they go
I was
year
gonna say,
round.
Pennsylvania is like one of the uh, birthplaces of America. So maybe you and I growing up in New England, also fairly historically significant to the United States, but maybe in Pennsylvania they're just like school all year round and especially on 4th of July. Um, but anyway, uh, I wrote here that Cindy walks in with the comically large water bottle. It's just an insane water bottle.
She's
Um,
thirsty.
and she tells Dean about the dead dog. He's immediately distraught, as anyone probably would be.
Couldn't have
But
waited until after the show to
she's
mention
upset.
that.
He's gonna wonder why she's upset. But I guess that's fair. But his response right away, though, is how many times did I tell you to lock the fucking gate? Which is a little
Not great.
harsh, I think. Like, I understand being upset in this moment, but I would personally, because I am woke and good and unproblematic, I would probably attempt to be nicer to my wife in that moment. Um, I don't know, man. And then after this, Dean and Cindy take Frankie to visit her grandpa. This is Cindy's dad, so the grandfather on Cindy's side. And we get a little bit more of Dean. I mean, he did just learn his dog is dead, but he's kind of being even more of a douche here. He's not even willing to put out his cigarette so that he can go talk to his father-in-law. His father-in-law has an oxygen tank, so he can't have people smoking cigarettes around him. And rather than put out the cigarette, Dean just stands over by the car. Um, and we also hear the grandfather ask Cindy if the two are fighting again. So this is kind of confirmation that they've been having um, I mean, like we said, couples do fight, but this is an indicator that they've been having fights to a degree where Cindy has either confided in her father about it or her father has overheard it enough to think of it as a pattern. Um, we touched on the 4th of July recital a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You have anything else to say about it? Any theorizing further about why are they doing this in school in July? Or conversely, thoughts about why didn't she lock the fucking gate? Or what do you think about the grandfather?
All I'll say for now about the grandfather is I was surprised at his portrayal in this scene versus how we see him later on.
Okay, we can talk about it. I wasn't.
Yeah, I there was an interesting, I thought, change in his character, but I'll save it for later.
All right, fair enough. So, this is when we finally cut away from the present timeline. This film, as it turns out, is told out of order. So we cut
Love when
to
they do that.
within reason. I think it's a neat way to do it. Sometimes I feel like, oh, this movie's doing this because they don't have the confidence to just tell the fucking story in order. Like here, not to give things away, but here there's like a very clear narrative purpose for cutting between these two time periods. Like it serves the theme and it draws a juxtaposition that is very intentional.
And very
Um,
effective at
Right.
times.
Rather than I'm struggling to think of an exact example, but a film that like tells its story out of sequence just to be cool and interesting. Um, because it feels like if it was told in order, it would just be boring and cliche. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I had a better comp or even a comp period, but I'm struggling to think of one right now. Um, so we cut to a flashback of younger Dean with, classic 2010 hot Gosling full head of hair. He's going to a moving company and interviewing for a job. He gets the job right away and starts working with other guys at the moving company. He tells one of them, "You're a man amongst men, no homo," um, which I may that's what I should have started the episode with.
Would
But
have been a good one.
uh, he says that to one of his boys as he begins developing a relationship with his coworkers. We get a brief scene where Dean talks to his coworkers about love and relationships and he's trying to ask them how they meet girls and things of that nature. He seems like the young guy on the crew. Um, he says, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says that he thinks men are more romantic than women. He says that women get to a place in their lives where they just pick a man with a good job who will stick around, but men get enamored by one woman after resisting marriage all of their lives. And I wrote here that, like, I don't know how much to kind of hold this and examine it as like a real thesis statement of the movie. I think this is I don't know. This sounds like a personal problem, Dean. I feel like I feel like you're generalizing quite a bit. You
I
know
was
what I
gonna say,
mean?
I think it says more about the character than like a larger
Than like what the
statement on
movie
the
thinks
film.
about love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, because I was like, huh, that's kind of an interesting. Well, maybe I guess being charitable. Well, not to spoil too much, but like, well, Dean is incredibly flawed, and I think at this point in his life, like many young men, maybe he does have a certain level of like attitude about men versus women. And, I think unfortunately, even today, especially today, there is that kind of hurdle to overcome, this kind of idea about some sort of unspoken battle of the sexes. Men are this way and women are this way. Um, that you have to navigate in order to successfully date, right?
Right.
Um,
They're the problem, not me.
right. And I'm sure that that could exist to a degree in both directions, but men tend to be more violent about it, frankly. So,
Facts.
yeah. Uh, Dean counts the money that he makes from his job, and we see the older gentleman that the crew was helping move in this particular scene. His name is Walter. The character's name is Walter. They drive his belongings, Walter's belongings, to an old folks' home in which he is now supposed to reside. This is one of my favorite scenes of the movie that we get here. I think it's such a great showcase that Dean has this like sentimentality about him that is worthwhile. We watch him carefully unpack all of Walter's belongings. He decorates the room to the nines. He hangs up the man's Walter's old war uniform. Um, I found it frankly pretty moving. And then we see Dean show Walter all of his work. Walter seems pretty appreciative. It's a very effective contrast from the more kind of dispassionate or at least irritable version of Dean that we've already met in the present day. A man who
Right.
is he's very great with his daughter, from what we can tell, but kind of short with Cindy and his father-in-law. Um, what do you think about our introduction to the moving company and this nursing home, which will play a bigger role in this side of Dean?
It's a nice bit, his interactions with Walter. Um, I love that he takes uh, such delicate care with all of his belongings, that he doesn't just unbox everything, he actually decorates the room. He then shows everything to Walter. He says, I hope you don't mind. I thought you might like this. And he's asking questions about his personal life. So you can see that and as we're seeing him form relationships with his coworkers, he seems like a, charismatic guy who's interested in interacting with other people, which is in contrast with how we've seen him behave with Cindy and his father-in-law. So I think in addition to having a nice head of hair and, this clear knowledge that we're going back in time, I think it very quickly we realize just how different the character we're seeing in the flashbacks and the earlier timeline is going to be to the one we're seeing in the present.
Yeah, and in the present, we are now thrust into Dean burying the dead dog and crying at the kitchen table with another beer next to
So
him.
sad, so sad.
Cindy embraces him. They have what seems to be like, a genuinely heartfelt moment here. Dean begins to watch some old home movies with Frankie and the dog. Um,
Excellent acting on the dog in these videos.
that is true. Excellent acting on the dog. Dean is clearly still in his feelings about this. Um, and as he's watching these home movies, Cindy is kind of hurriedly cleaning up the house, trying to, I guess, utilize the time without their, daughter around to try to clean up a little bit, tidy up a little bit. And Dean says that he has an idea and he calls a corny themed motel to try to arrange a room for them for the evening. Cindy calls it like a cheesy sex motel. Like I think she uses that phrase exactly. She
Do
kind
these
of
still exist? These like love themed motels?
I don't know. They have to, especially in like I don't want to generalize,
Pennsylvania?
but like Vegas
Yeah.
probably has stuff like this. Um, you've been to Vegas. I've never been. I'd like to go, but um,
To a love motel.
I went to Vegas, but yeah, why not? Love Motel, not with you, but like it could be fun to invite Jessica. I wonder what she's gonna
She's
listen
gonna
to this.
love this.
She's gonna listen to this and be so mad. I just mean generally like what kind of theme would be cool, like a Jurassic themed room, like a dinosaur bone bed.
The
Well,
themed room we see later on in the movie is pretty
I
interesting.
was gonna say, yeah, that's maybe a good question. What themed room would you want if you had to, no ifs, ands, or buts, go to a sex motel? I'm not saying you have to have sex at the sex motel, but you have to spend a night there. I
Party of
vote,
one.
I vote prehistoric all the way. Um, yeah, I vote prehistoric theme all the way. What about you? Anything
Uh,
jump to mind?
a little bit similar. I'm thinking maybe like Amazon snoo snoo vibe.
No, no, no. You don't get an escort with the room, Ryan. What do you mean? What do you mean, snoo snoo vibe?
You know,
No, I don't
a
know.
Wonder Woman. What's the
Oh, the
mascara
mascara. That's I yeah, but okay. So do you think there's gonna be like a woman who shows up to
standing
the
in the
room?
room? No.
Then what's themed about it? Just like Greek architecture and shit or
Yeah,
Roman architecture?
like
Fine.
temple.
All right. I gotta get out of this before you say something perverse. Um, so Dean is calling the sex motel. Cindy
Mm-hmm.
objects because she's on call at her job, and she says the motel is like 2 hours away. I think she says that that's how long they'd have to drive.
Two
Maybe she's
hours.
maybe she's exaggerating, but it doesn't seem like it. Um, there are
And
two
she works the
options.
next day.
True. Yeah. Well, no, she's on call,
Oh, she's on call.
so she could get called in at any moment.
Right.
Um, their options are Cupid's Cove or the Future Room, and Gosling elects to choose the Future Room, which we will see later in all of its glory. And as Cindy is kind of objecting, Dean pleads with her for some time alone to connect. It's clear that he feels like they haven't had a chance to connect emotionally or physically, I guess, in a little while. Um, they do have a young child, so I don't think that's super out of the ordinary in that scenario. I don't have children, but that just seems logical to me. And though Gosling is still charming in this scene, um, and uh, Williams as Cindy is kind of playfully smiling here and there at the idea of the outing, it doesn't ever really feel like by the end of the scene they get on the same page about it.
No.
Like Cindy smiles and relents, but still doesn't seem fully into it. Um,
And he clearly cannot read any body language from her.
right. It seems like he is on a mission to like not well, we will get to the actual motel escapade later,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like he is going to will some sort of alone time because he feels disconnected from her and he wants that to change, right? That seems like his one focus. Whether or not she's interested in joining him on that mission does not seem to matter right now.
Just
um,
like with the seatbelt, when he wants something to happen, he will continue to say it until it happens.
That's a good shout. Although I guess I, it's an interesting. That's such an interesting example because I'm thinking about in my personal life. If Jessica was backing out of the driveway and she was not wearing her seatbelt, I would yell at her over and over again until she put the goddamn seatbelt on. I would. I just would. Be safe,
In that
dummy.
scenario, he's not doing anything objectively wrong, but
Right.
I think
Okay.
it signifies,
A pattern of behavior. Okay.
yes,
Fair
that
enough.
will be objectively wrong later on.
Very objectively wrong. So we cut to a liquor mart where did you have any other thoughts on the phone call, et cetera, et cetera? I
Nope.
don't jump in whenever you want. But so we cut to the liquor mart, local liquor mart, where Cindy runs into a character called Bobby, who by all implications is an old flame of hers. I wrote here that I just personally, the kind of person that I am, I always hate running into someone from high school or college in the wild, and it would be even more annoying if it was an ex. Um, but Bobby kind of he crosses a line almost immediately in their conversation.
Really awkward.
They do a brief kind of catch up. He learns that she's married, and then his like almost his second question to her, maybe not literally, but it feels like it is, "Oh, are you faithful to him?" And it's such an out of pocket thing to ask somebody. Um,
And for a split second, you think, is this just his weird sense of humor? But
right.
then, no, the way he's staring at her, he clearly is
He means
asking
that
this
shit.
legitimately. Yeah.
And we will learn more about Bobby later, who is a
Bobby.
he is a asshole of the highest order. Like so I wrote here that, Dean, as we've met him already, is a little bit of a douche, but it seems like Bobby has that going for him as well. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
poor Cindy has
Bad type.
a type that is attracted to her, it seems. We'll learn more about this interaction and what birthed this awkwardness later on in the film. No pun intended, but I don't really want to jump the gun on that particular part of Bobby or Cindy's backstory. Um, Back in the car, Cindy tells Dean not right away, but as they begin driving again, that she ran into Bobby in the liquor mart, and Dean is immediately uncomfortable. It causes a fight pretty much right away the second she's done divulging that information. It's one of those fights that in movies or like in relationships or in whatever that like it's in my mind it's like a fight that's not about the fight, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
Or it's a fight, but not about what it's about. If that tracks. Like Dean is mad that Cindy even spoke to him, and then she correctly, I think, is like, should I have just like clammed up and not said anything? Because that's a total social faux pas. And
Right.
then that also makes Dean upset. And then she tries to say, oh, well, he looked old and fat and ugly anyway, which, we saw Bobby, so we know that's not necessarily true.
No, he
Um,
was looking good.
he was looking good. But then that upsets Dean even further because he's like, why do I
Hmm.
care? Why would I care if he looks good or if he's like in a good place in his life? So then Cindy's on the back foot even further. She says, okay, I guess I shouldn't have said anything because this is causing so much shit. And then that upsets Dean because he's like, oh, the idea of not saying anything to me even crossed your mind. Like that seems to offend him. What I am trying to get at, I guess, is like this feels like a fight was primed to happen about something, and this just like
Hmm.
presented the perfect opportunity. That's more of what I mean. Like
Yeah.
what did Cindy really do that's in the wrong if you're like a mature adult in the situation, right? She ran into an ex, she exchanged a few words, and then she told you about it directly after. That seems on the up and up to me. You know what I mean? So
And it makes you wonder what their relationship was in the past that she brings him up and it sets Gosling off immediately.
right. And to such a degree that you wonder, does Dean himself have some sort of history with Bobby? I don't mean
Right.
romantically. This isn't Challenger's situation, but like does he has he met the guy? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But like this conversation is like a total disaster. They're at odds right away. Cindy has to pull over. She pretends that she has to go to the bathroom, which I don't even think that Dean even believes.
No.
But she pulls over, goes into the woods, and just catches her breath a little bit. Um, and then we cut to a young Cindy at a college campus. She is rolling herself across campus in a wheelchair. Um,
Bit of an
well,
odd introduction to the
yeah,
scene.
I have a take about this. Before we do this, did you want to analyze any further from your perspective this fight that they had in the car?
I mean, I do think this fight it definitely felt like a a real conversation you would see in a failing relationship. That situation where you want to tell someone something
Yeah,
because you don't want to keep secrets from them, and you know if they found out later they would be really upset. But as soon as you tell them, you know it's going to set them off, so you immediately regret saying it and question whether or not you should have said it. And then you try and say something to make them feel better about it, and that just makes
and
it
that doesn't
worse.
work. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's a really good bit of writing and acting from Gosling and Williams.
yeah, and yeah. I mean, even in yeah,
It's like
you
watching a
know,
train wreck. You
I,
know it's going to
exactly.
keep going worse and worse, and you can't look away, but you just feel terrible for these characters and don't want to keep watching it.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. And even in its awkwardness, it is like infinitely compelling and watchable just because
Mm-hmm.
these performances are very strong. So Cindy in the past, in the college campus, in the wheelchair with the candlestick. This is
The
probably
candlestick.
this is probably the I watched Clue recently. It's on the brain. Um, so this is probably the most one of the most like cliche, quirky indie romance character tropey nonsense things about this film. Like just this little quirk for whatever reason, just kind of was. I was like, okay, this feels very like mid 2000s, early 2010s independent romance movie. Like she's just hanging out in a wheelchair across campus. We learn why she has the wheelchair in her possession, but like I just thought it was like uh I don't know. I just found it annoying for some reason.
Aren't I adorkable?
Exactly. And then Williams Cindy goes to a wrestling practice on campus and meets Bobby. So we learned that yes, they were in fact in a relationship because Bobby bounces from his wrestling practice, and this is where we learned that she was not ever at any point in her life wheelchair bound. He like calls her out. He's like, "Why are you being such a freak?" He kind of says it playfully, but also kind of intensely. Um, and Bobby is like sweaty and disgusting from this wrestling match, but they still have a gross ass makeout session anyways that I
He's
totally
going at her in a public hallway.
I cringed at this makeout. Like I like sensuality in movies, but this was not hot to me. This was just gross.
This was like a
Um
prom after party. Tough to watch.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I am totally so between the sweaty wrestling makeout session and the wheelchair, um, I'm hyperbolizing a little bit. This did not like sour me on the movie as a whole or like make me deduct points or whatever, but I found it gross slash annoying. What do you feel about this first introduction to the younger version of Cindy?
I thought it was a pretty funny scene. It does feel a little bit off from the rest of the movie, but I didn't mind. I was happy to have something a little strange to laugh at for a few minutes. But yeah, it does end on a bit of a sour note with Bobby going at Cindy pretty aggressively. Um, Clearly, we're seeing that he's a very horny young man, which will come into play later.
Yeah, it's definitely intentional. I don't want to act
Yes.
like, oh, these filmmakers, missed the mark. It is definitely intentional because we stay with the younger version of Cindy as she goes to her grandmother to talk to her, and we learn that the wheelchair belongs to her grandmother. Um, Cindy asks her what falling in love feels like, and the grandmother reveals that she reveals that she only really loved Cindy's grandpa at the beginning, quote unquote, and never really felt like she was paid much attention to or valued as as a person, as an individual. She cautions Cindy against rushing into a love that might not ultimately be worth it, kind of spelling out what may or may not be happening in the
Mm,
future timeline. Um, and we also get a brief flashback to a family dinner with Cindy and her parents, and her dad is like a total fucking asshole.
totally.
He makes like a verbally abusive kind of ruckus at the family dinner, and he throws the meatloaf like across the table at her poor mom. Clearly also impacting Cindy negatively in the process. Um, I wrote here that like that meatloaf did look pretty disgusting, but I don't think throwing it and cussing your wife out is called for. Um,
No.
so let's talk a little bit about Cindy's grandmother and
Hmm.
what she says about love and relationships. If you have thoughts about that and how it ties into the movie, I think it's kind of a very direct statement of the ideas that we're exploring here. And then Cindy's dad in the future timeline, we were referring to him as grandpa because he is Frankie's grandpa. Um,
Hmm.
but well, let me say personally, I think that this contrast between the kind of toned down older version of Cindy's dad that we see in the future and I and this version where he's,
Hmm.
very clearly kind of explosive and abusive.
Yeah.
I actually found that arc arc, I guess in the grander sense, we don't like see it play out on camera. I found that to be not entirely implausible. Like
That he
I
softens a little bit as he gets older.
yes,
Hmm.
I have people in my personal life who I wouldn't go so far as to say like were that horrible to me necessarily, but like certainly more irritable and hard-headed when I was
Mm.
younger, and in their old age have definitely maintained a degree of that but softened up a lot in their old
Mm.
age. I think that is something that definitely can happen to people as they get older. But so tell me if you have thoughts about this family dinner with Cindy, and then if you have thoughts about this grand kind of statement from her uh, grandmother.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly startling at first to see just how aggressively tense and abusive the dad is compared to the grandpa version that we see earlier in the film. But I do think that your interpretation of his arc is right. And I certainly have seen instances where, people can treat their grandchildren differently than they treat their children. The idea of being a little softer, a little more protective of your little grandkids. So I can also buy that idea that maybe he's a very loving, devoted grandfather. Um, maybe a flawed but caring father, and then a just a bad, abusive husband. People contain multitudes. So it's an interesting character, even though we don't spend a ton of time with him. And then I did find the conversation and Cindy's relationship with her grandma interesting as well, because I imagine it would have to be tough to hear your grandmother say, your grandfather and I weren't really in love. Um, but I also, got to give it up to the grandmother for giving her granddaughter
An
legitimate,
honest answer.
honest answer, and I think like decent advice. That I do think plays an important role in what happens later on in the movie, and I think is interesting to keep in mind when thinking about what this movie might be trying to say about relationships and marriage and love.
Yeah, and I think both the relationship between Cindy's grandmother and her grandfather that we don't necessarily see a lot of that. We hear this conversation, and then the snapshot that we see of her parents' relationship, we learn that, even though she doesn't come from a broken home, or at least we don't
Mm-hmm.
know that her parents ever divorced. We know that the template for relationships that has been set for her is not one that is necessarily wholesome, or even, relationships do contain multitudes, but it's not even a template that leans towards wholesome or healthy.
She
Um,
doesn't have good examples of marriages in her life, clearly.
exactly. Um, and speaking of relationships and relationships that are maybe not so great, we cut to Cindy and Bobby having sex in her college dorm. Uh, and speaking of her grandmother talking about don't get with somebody who doesn't have regard for you as a person, um, Bobby is like a total dummy, idiot, loser, moron who fails to pull out in the final moments of their act of sexual congress here. Um, I my read on this scene is that it looks like he barely even like tries. So I think he just does not give a shit.
Didn't care.
I don't think it's like a genuine accident. Um and I wrote here that, like, without getting too uh gross or graphic, like, even as a college student, you should know how to control yourself if you're going to choose to, do something like that without protection. Um, but like I said, my interpretation is that Bobby just does not have enough care for her as an individual, kind of just views her as a uh, means to uh, physical gratification on his end. So I just think he's being a tool. Like, even when they are in the middle, or even when they are in the midst of the act, it does not seem like he is very attentive to whether or not she is having fun or feeling good.
No.
So um, we also see Cindy try to kind of not to sound gross. She tries to kind of like clean up the aftermath of the
Mm-hmm.
failed pullout, and we will learn how well that attempt shakes out in the future of this film. Um, you know, sex scenes in movies are quite the topic of discussion even now. What do you think about this one, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in lockstep with you as far as the characters' self-absorption, lack of thought or care for Cindy's, consent or own physical needs. During this scene, he barely even apologizes for it. So he shows very little remorse or interest in her response and her feelings. So um, it's, obviously a very vulnerable moment for her. Um, and yeah, just really hammers home how douchey this guy is. And then it makes thinking back to the scene of them in the liquor store all the more kind of strange that they have this sort of friendly conversation that she uh, doesn't just ignore him or tell him to F off. But I think that could be symbolic of, her character in a way.
Yeah, that's fair. I think also given what we learn about Bobby, he continues to be in this film. This is not the
Right.
last time we see him. I think given what we learn about him later on too, some other tendencies of his, there's a um
Fear.
there's a fear, I think, maybe a little bit, even when she meets him so many years later.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly the timeline. I think they say their daughter is maybe 7, so maybe it's 7 years late. No, that doesn't sound
I
right.
think it's 5 or 6, maybe
Okay,
around 6.
something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so we cut to Cindy moving her grandmother into a nursing home. Interesting. We've seen a nursing home already in this film. What could that be about?
Mm.
Cindy is reading to her grandmother. Seems like a pretty steamy novel. Um, she runs into Dean in what I actually think is kind of a clever meet cute.
Hmm.
She sees him taking a wad of money in Walter's room, and
Not at all misleading.
it does look like from her perspective that he's stealing it. And he assures her that no, this is his portion of the money from the moving gig that he is a part of. And the sparks between them are kind of immediate. Another kind of interesting, very purposeful contrast to their relationship in the present that we've witnessed thus far. Um, what do you think about this first meeting of Cindy and Dean?
It's a good meet cute, and a really clever bit of filmmaking. You mentioned that we're cutting back and forth between the past and the present, Cindy's life, and then Dean's life. And the last time we see Dean in the past, I believe we're seeing him at the nursing home, and it ends on this shot of him clearly observing
Seeing
something,
something, yeah.
seeing something, and then it just cuts away. And so you don't know what it is, and you don't find out for several more scenes. And so I love that all these scenes later, cut back to it and we find out, oh, this is the first time he's seeing her. This is where their storylines are finally converging.
Right. That's a good point, and it is clever. It's like if you're a film nerd or cinephile worth your salt, when you see that they end that first past uh I guess past sequence of Dean, when they
Mm-hmm.
ended on him eyeing something from across the hallway, and you know what kind of movie this is, you kind of know that's him meeting Michelle Williams for the first time. But even so, the way that they executed is so kind of fun that you're like, bravo, movie, good job. It doesn't feel kind of contrived or corny. Um,
Yeah.
so we go back to the modern day. We're at the sex motel. We're at the future room. Cindy is remarking on the lack of windows, the lack of fridge, further alcohol,
She's not
and
impressed.
she is not impressed. Gosling tries to lighten the mood by talking about the rotating bed. I think he even says like "cool bed." Like
Yeah, clearly trying to
he's
get her to say something nice.
yeah, and I think he says also the room looks like a robot's vagina.
Not wrong.
Very Ron Burgundy of him. Um, they call their daughter briefly to check in, which is where we get the this is how they laugh in the future. Ah, and um,
I have a
um,
feeling Gosling improved that.
I,
I can't believe that was written down.
it does, yeah. That is pretty. Yeah, I wouldn't put that past him. Um, and then Williams gets into the shower. She turns on the water. Gosling joins her. He begins to try to initiate some intimacy. It looks like he goes downtown, tries to attempt to give some oral sex there, and
Not working.
Cindy does not seem very into it, and he clearly takes the rejection a little harshly, but he doesn't really say anything about it, and he exits the shower. Um, Ryan, do you have takes on the future room? Do you have takes on how they laugh in the future? Do you think it's an accurate depiction? Do you have takes on oral sex in the shower?
I'm going to avoid that last question. To each their own, uh, depending on the couple. I mean, I think the Future Room is an amazing setting. It's so weirdly designed, and for a movie that's just about two people going through it in a relationship, this is a very grounded movie. To all of a sudden be in this kind of weird futuristic hotel room is just a fun kind of change of scenery. Um, I don't think that's how people laugh in the future. I don't buy Dean's logic at all, but I do think that rotating bed looked awesome. So I agree with him there. That is, in fact, a cool
A
bed.
cool bed.
I mean, the shower scene, it wasn't dissimilar to the car scene.
Mhm.
Previously, it's not as intense and it's not as vocal, but again, you just know he's going to try and get in there with her. He's going to try and initiate. And you just have a feeling that she's not going to be interested. Like she's, again, not giving off, signals of wanting to be frisky. So you know it's going to be awkward and neither of them is going to walk away happy.
Yeah, and I do really like the future room as like a setting. I think it's so interesting from like a narrative perspective that like in like a writing perspective that their two choices are um not to not to articulate like some grand statement here in the middle of
Mm-hmm.
the episode, but like it's very notable that I think their two options are Cupid's Cove and the future room. And
That's a good point.
every time we see them in the past, one could argue they're in like Cupid's Cove mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're lovey, they're sweet. It feels like a classic, more uh, warm-hearted romance movie. And then the future room is chromatic, cold, dispassionate. You know, quite literally, like the color palette is this like freezing blue Valentine, right? But like
Yep.
I think that's such a clever um choice that is, just even more even more it's a great tool in, conveying the themes of the story in my opinion. So Gosling does not get his wish in the shower. Um, we see him getting ice from the motel machine. He goes back into the room and is still, a little bit of a grump about the situation. Cindy offers him a drink. He accepts. Dean puts on a CD. Back in 2010, they still had CD players, so they play this cute little song that we will later learn is more significant to their relationship than we now realize. And this does lighten Cindy up a little bit. The two have like a little slow dance together. They drink together. I wrote here, oh, there's still some love here. Maybe this is just like a particularly intense, rough patch, which
Mm.
can happen in a relationship. You have,
Yes.
a week or two where it feels like all you're doing is fighting, but at the end of it, you realize the love is still there. So I wrote here there's still some plausible deniability as to where this relationship might go. Um, we're about to go back into the past, but do you have any thoughts on this little slow dancing scene? Sometimes I think it's easy to tune out in a movie that asks you to watch two people slow dance. I feel like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. What do you feel about this little portion of the future room?
Yeah, I mean it did seem like for a second there they were having a moment where she wasn't immediately turned off, where he wasn't goofing off too much, or doing something to annoy her. You have a feeling it's going to be short lived. Um, but I think it's in character for Dean to try and pull out all the moves during this, um, endeavor. Right? He goes to see if she wants to do anything in the shower. That doesn't work out. Let's go for a slow dance and see if that one works better.
Oh, yeah. That's a kind of a cynical read, but I don't think it's necessarily out of pocket. Like, is this version of Dean now busting out this, I guess, spoiler alert, busting out one of their songs as like
Mm-hmm.
maybe this will just speed things up so we can hook up essentially. Um, but I don't know if I buy that cynical of a take on the situation in full. Like
Yeah.
I do think we learn later that even if it is an attempt at like speeding up some sort of physical connection, I think what Dean wants from that physical connection, we will learn later, is not what, for example, Bobby seemed to care about, which is just the
Yes.
physical release. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but we will talk about that when we get there. It is quite an uncomfortable watch. Um, right now, let's retreat into the past timeline again. Sound good? We see Cindy with her grandmother. Um, Bobby shows up to the house with flowers. He tries to apologize. Bobby is the tool of the century, though. So the second Cindy doesn't immediately forgive him, he calls her a bitch. It just
Very reminiscent of Half Nelson.
it reminded me of that SNL sketch that I quote this with Jessica all the time. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where it's like liberal feminist guys trying to pick up women at the bar. So
No.
it's like a series of like Beck Bennett, Kyle Moody, each after the other
Oh,
going up to Cecily Strong at the bar. They're like,
this sounds
yeah,
great.
yeah. They're like, yeah, I went to the women's march. I bought a pussy hat and everything. Anyway, you want to come back to my place and like sit on my face? And she's like, no. And immediately they're like, bitch. They like immediately just start being misogynist. And it's funny, but it's very incisive look at
Accurate, sadly.
not that hardcore conservative men are diamonds in the rough, but like if you're libbed up, that doesn't automatically make you a white knight anyway. Um, so yep, that's where we check in with Bobby. Um,
Grandma doesn't seem interested in talking to Bobby either.
no, Grandma doesn't give him the time of day, and good for her. Um, we're about to go to young Dean. Do you have any thoughts about this little interaction with Bobby, or can I kind of chug along?
We can keep on chugging.
All right. So we see Dean talking to his coworkers again. He's saying that he thinks he found love at first sight with Cindy. He's very romantic about it. He says the second he saw Cindy, he feels like he knew her forever. Um, his coworker kind of comically says that Dean is too in his head. He just needs to get laid, which, in retrospect, maybe might have saved him from a lot of hurt, as we will learn later on. But
Could be.
he does not heed that particular call, for better or for worse. Um, Dean finds a locket that belonged to Walter, the older gentleman from earlier, and he uses it as an excuse to go back to the nursing home, really just looking to try to see Cindy again. I think is his main goal. Cindy's not there. Her grandmother is. They chat, and her grandmother kind of does not have answers as to where Walter is, because we learned that Walter is not there. And, I'm assuming the worst. This is a very
Same.
very old gentleman. Um, and then let me push a little bit further, because this is kind of a long stretch in the past here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we then see Cindy on a bus. By happenstance, Dean is also there. He's got his ukulele with him? Question mark. I wrote.
Oh
I didn't.
yeah.
And
That's
he
random.
he moves over to sit with her. Uh, and this is kind of a move that I think only really works if you're as hot as Ryan Gosling. Like, yes, they've met once and flirted pretty successfully, but if you then met the same guy on a random public bus, I would feel like I was being stalked, maybe. And then he insists on sitting next to you. It seems to work on Cindy, though. They connect. They talk about death. They talk about, you know, dying in whether or not they want to do it, which is kind of, cutesy indie romance dialogue. Their chemistry is growing here.
Exchange
Um,
horrible jokes.
they exchange some horrible jokes, and he also kind of negs her by saying, "You're so pretty that I bet people treat you like too well and pretend you're funny, even if you're not." Um, so we're about to see their first real date, but before we get to that, which is kind of a pivotal moment, um, give me your thoughts on Dean going all the way back to the nursing home just in the hopes of seeing her again, kind of a romantic gesture. Give me your thoughts on Walter, who is no longer with us, or if you have thoughts about this. It's not a full meet cute because they have met before, but this
Right.
second little interaction on the bus.
Sad that Walter's gone. And that everybody's just like, oh, I don't know where he is, or oh, he died. Um, Unfortunately, and that's not uncommon for people to get to that phase where you're moved into a nursing home or assisted living, and it usually signifies you're nearing can signify you're nearing the end, and you don't end up staying there very long. So I felt bad, but I'll give it over to Dean. That was a pretty good excuse to go back, to say, "Oh, I'm not here, just to see your granddaughter. I didn't go just to see you. I went to return this locket, this very nice locket that poor Walter left behind. So props to him there. Um,
Well, I hate to interrupt you. Walter didn't leave it behind. The moving company left it in the moving vehicle.
you're
So,
right.
so
You're
it is
right.
on them. It
It's
is on
not
them.
it's not Walter's fault. You're right. Justice for Walter.
Justice for Walter.
Um, the bus scene is great. I mean, I think it is one of the pivotal moments of the movie because you're right. Even though they've already met, this is where we're actually seeing them get to know one another. She's, clearly has her guard up, doesn't seem all that interested right away necessarily. And you can also tell she's just awkward at, I think, at talking to, this strange man that she doesn't know.
Mhm.
Um, and I do think it was funny to see Gosling pull the, what I think is a classic jerk move. The I'm going to compliment you, but I want you to think I'm cool. So I'm gonna,
Insult you at the same
yeah, I'm
time.
gonna give you like a backhanded insult at the same time, um, and see if that works. And I liked that she called him out on it. Um, so that was I
Yeah.
thought a really smart bit of writing.
Negging is a very of the time kind
Yes.
of practice that guys were encouraged to do. You ever do anything like that in your dating life? I unfortunately have way back in the day before I realized, like, it's probably better if you're just plain nice to people that you're interested in.
I don't know. Maybe I wonder if I was too nice. Maybe I should have done a little more negging.
Yeah. Jessica, to this day, holds my feet to the fire for when we were first flirting, uh, telling her, I think I said that, like, okay, not to sound too mushy gushy, but I think her eyes are very beautiful. She has these kind of intense, sometimes blue eyes. And
She
when we
does
were
have very blue eyes.
when we were first getting together, um, I said, usually I go for girls with darker eyes, but something like yours are just very pretty. You know what I mean? And to this day,
That's a good
anytime
one.
I can't compliment her eyes without her going, "Oh, so you like them now?" I will never escape it. Um,
I thought
anyway,
you were gonna go somewhere else with the blue eyes.
no, what Turner Diaries?
No, Gollum.
Oh, Gollum. No, she is not a fan of Gollum.
He's the best character.
She watched all the Lord of the Rings movies with me. She hates that little freak. Anyway, they Cindy and Dean go on a date to eat ice cream and walk around. This is also a pretty like I don't mean cliche in a bad way, but this is also to me like a pretty cliche indie romance
Yeah.
kind of scene in a lot of ways. Like Dean is singing songs and playing his ukulele as he woos the female lead, the quirky female lead. And Cindy, not to be outdone, recites all of the American presidents in song
And
and
starts
it
tap dancing.
starts tap dancing. So it's very like
Adorkable.
Adork, yeah, that's the perfect word. We've used it a few times, but yeah, it's adorkable. You know, that's a flavor of like romantic chemistry that is a little bit of its time, and I think is
Yeah.
maybe because it was so prevalent at one time, kind of um, parodied today or made fun of today. But you know, within the context of the movie, I think it works. This recitation of the presidents in song would not really get my it would not really get my juices flowing, but it either works on Dean or he pretends that it does. And I also noted that this movie came out in 2010. Obama was president in 2010, but Cindy stops her song at President Bush. So is Cindy racist? Yes or no?
Well, at the very least, she's not a fan of Obama.
At the very least, she's not a fan of his policies. So,
No, she's
um,
very angry at Obama.
yeah, thanks, Obama. Um, so, what do you think of their first real date? You know, is it, and you know, I, despite the adorkableness, I think it's pretty effective. It's pretty cute.
Yeah, it's fine. I The ukulele is just an instrument I've never really vibed with. And I think, the song he sings and the weird voice is a little bit odd. Her tap dancing in front of this storefront. I mean, like you said, it's clearly very quirky. It's very weird. You know, I think it's probably perfect for those characters at this time in the movie. It makes sense uh with their chemistry and personalities. It's an odd first date, and they don't even get pancakes.
They don't get pancakes, which is, you know, yeah, that's a good question, I guess.
And she
Conversely,
doesn't
like,
lick the ice cream off his face like Rachel McAdams did.
true, true. We'll have to do maybe separate from our best known four at the end of the episode. We'll have to say like which, because you know, Gosling, I think, is a famous like kind of has chemistry with everybody kind of
Everyone.
actor. We'll have to maybe rank who his best on screen boos are. Um, Although I guess there really isn't one in every single movie we've agreed to cover, like unless we're counting In a Day
Russell Crowe
Artemis,
and the Nice Guys.
Russell Crowe, and you know what? I would make the argument that yes, he counts there. That movie hinges on their relationship and their chemistry.
The
But
real winner is Eva Mendes, who, we're both big fans of.
they they're in a movie together that we've agreed to watch.
No, they're together in real life.
I know, but we're not going to talk. What do you? We're not dedicating an episode to their real life marriage. What the fuck are you on about?
I think that would be interesting.
I think it would be boring as shit.
I
Anyway,
can't wait to do her on this podcast.
I don't think she's very talented, with all due respect.
Ouch,
Um,
baby. Very ouch.
um, so we cut to the future room again. We're back in the present day. This, Dean and Cindy are having dinner, drinks. They have a kind of contentious conversation. Cindy asks Dean if he thinks that he's maybe wasting some of his potential. This to me is like this is like it, I think for my money, this is like the most insightful scene as far as peeking into these characters' minds.
Mm.
Um, she says that Dean is good at so much and that he has potential. Dean kind of pushes back and says, well, he draws satisfaction from working to provide from his family, being a husband, being a father. It's kind of up to the audience whether or not they think that he means that, or, or that maybe he's convinced himself of that, but it's not true. That's kind of left up to interpretation. Um, and then we also get a detail here where maybe Cindy is exaggerating. Does not seem like it. She says that Dean drinks as early as 8 a.m. before going to work,
Pretty
which is a
early.
clue. Which is a clue that maybe he's not super happy with his life, or that some sort of substance abuse is maybe more prevalent than it ought to be. Um, and Dean tries to claim that his life as it stands is like the dream. So why is she, pushing the envelope? Like, what does she even mean when she says, when she asks if he wants quote unquote more, right? Like, what more is there is kind of his vibe. And this is a very, at least to me, this was like a very meaty scene. as far as on like a micro and a macro level, because not only does it give us a peek into their specific relationship, but how these, I guess, how these artists in general, the filmmakers, the writers, etc., what they want to say about how relationships work. Period. Um, I'll let you get into it, but I just wrote here that like this to me, not to get all too woke into like tinfoil hat y, but I
Mm,
was like, this kind of makes the 4th of July setting ish even more interesting to me because it's like he says the word dream, which to me invoked like the American dream of this like
hmm.
nuclear appearing family. They're in Pennsylvania, right? So I'm like, the American dream, in many ways, even if it is achieved, is still very limiting in certain respects, right? Because you go to work and you generate capital for yourself, your boss, the corporation you work for, you build your family, right? That's the American dream. But, what happens if, God forbid, you're still unhappy or, or unfulfilled with that for any reason, right? Because because it's so embedded in just how things are quote unquote supposed to go.
Yeah, the norm.
um what exactly is the remedy for that flavor of dissatisfaction if you find yourself struggling with it, and does a healthy remedy for that even exist, right? Or are you just supposed to end up spiraling in one way or another, um that we see Dean maybe doing with the
Yeah.
drinking at 8 a.m. and X and Y, um, or that we see Cindy struggling with, she has a husband and a daughter, but something about their unit is just not working for her, right? So to me, this is one of the deepest scenes in the movie, and maybe please tell me if you think I'm overthinking it, but that's kind of this scene made me think the most, I think, out of a lot of the sequences in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. I think the argument could be made that this is the most pivotal dialogue exchange of the movie because up until this point, we've seen that Cindy is clearly not happy with Dean. We've seen that, Dean is growing frustrated with Cindy, that he's failing to connect with her, physically, emotionally. And we haven't learned a lot about the time in between these two timelines, the past and the present,
It's a
you
great
know.
point. Yeah.
So, and like you mentioned earlier, we've heard Cindy's father say, "Oh, are you fighting again?" So there have been sly allusions, but I think this is really where we see them actually vocalize their problems with each other and their problems with their relationship as it currently exists. That Cindy is frustrated by Dean's lack of ambition. Dean is frustrated by feeling like himself and their family is not enough for her. That he, feels that he is being loving, that he's being a good father, that he's trying to be a good husband, and he's not getting any sort of appreciation for that. She feels that she's working her butt off. And Dean is more interested in, goofing around and drinking than actually being a responsible adult. So it's a very real, I think, raw conversation um, that I think is representative of problems that I think quite a lot of couples go through. This idea of your life maybe not turning out how you expected it to be. Um, Whether that's maybe because you didn't expect yourself to settle down and you did, or maybe you thought that was what you wanted and you're now realizing that maybe you did it too early, or maybe you weren't ready for that kind of commitment yet. So I think it's so well acted between Williams and Gosling because this easily could have turned into a shouting match. It could have been
Yeah.
really over the top and dramatic, and it certainly feels tense and it gets to some heightened moments. But this feels like two real people having a conversation rather than two actors trying to, kind of show off or one up each other.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it makes me think about um, a scene in another pretty popular, more recent Gosling movie, La La Land. There's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a contentious dinner scene there as well that from my, I love La La Land. Not to spoil my thoughts on that movie, but my recollection is that that scene is maybe a little shorter,
Mm-hmm.
but I think thematically pretty similar. So I'm interested to actually compare and contrast when we get to it. Um, but yeah, that's a good point. And as we get to more substantive, like whole cloth thoughts about the movie, I would love to return to the fact that, not to give anything away, but at this point in the movie, it's become pretty clear, and this is true. We are not going to see some sort of middle timeline.
Right.
We are decisively doing this past the inception of the relationship and where we are now. Um, so let's push through because there's another pretty difficult part of the film to discuss coming down the pipe here. The couple begins to get hammered. Cindy's hanging out on the bed. Dean falls onto the ground in another part of the room. Cindy goes over. Dean pulls her down on top of him. Um, there is this is probably to me the most uncomfortable scene of the movie.
Yeah.
There is an attempt at sex here that is pretty cringe inducing in many ways, intentionally so, but
Yes.
they're both drunk. Dean has this kind of gross entitled moment where he loses his cool and says how much physical rejection is he supposed to take. I may be paraphrasing, but he says something like he deserves the sex because he's good to her and he's good to their daughter, which, like, I'm not saying that you can't I'm not saying that he can't feel spurned, but like articulating it in this way and feeling entitled to that kind of action is pretty fucked up. And Williams kind of relents after he says that. She undresses herself further. They start to have sex, but there are some close-ups of Cindy as she's kind of wincing. She doesn't really seem to be getting any uh, pleasure, emotional or physical, from what is happening.
Not
And
at all.
Dean can sense this, and that angers him because you know uh, compared to the scene that we see of her and Bobby earlier on, where it seems like Bobby wants to, for lack of a better term, get his rocks off and kind of peace out. For Dean here, this is more about wanting to feel some sort of close emotional and physical bond at the same time.
Yeah.
And so sensing this detachment from her is triggering, and he cusses her out. This is, like I said, it's about feeling loved for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that does not seem to be in the cards in this moment. So they stop their, I wrote here in quotes, love making.
Right. It's one way
But
to put it.
That's one way to put it.
That's what Dean would like to be doing.
Exactly. Um, Cindy goes into the bathroom and locks herself inside. Dean bangs on the door, demanding to be let in, presumably to, I would hope, apologize. Um, this sequence kind of is similar to a bit in Half Nelson, which we also discussed. Um,
Yeah.
that occurs much later on in that film. This is like this is maybe about the halfway point of the film. In Half Nelson, it occurs much later. Um, but yeah, well, and let me also say, let me push through a little bit, and then I'll let you have the floor because I think it's important to say that we immediately cut to the past again,
Mm-hmm.
and we see a young Dean and Cindy flirting on another date. Um, you know, another very intentional contrast to where we are now in the future room. And in the past, they flirt all the way from the street to the cab to the bedroom, where a very sensual sex scene does unfold.
Yep.
Gosling is like, and this is also very well acted. Both of these scenes, as uncomfortable as the first one is, both scenes are very well acted. In this latter one, in the past, um, say that 5 times fast. This latter one that is in the past, but yes, that is true. Um, this one is shot in a more erotic way, right? Gosling is like he's unwrapping Williams like a present. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He gives her what seems to be very effective oral sex in this scene,
It's
and
really the one time in the movie where she seems to be
into it. Yeah,
receiving some sort of pleasure.
and I think this bit of acting is quite realistic from both parties. I was kind of surprised at how I felt like I was watching something pornographic, frankly. So good for them in that way. But this is, of course, to demonstrate the passion that once existed between them. At this stage in their relationship, effortless. Um, give me your takes on these dueling sex scenes.
Yeah, I mean the one in the future room, again, in some ways it feels like since they got to the future room, we've been building towards this moment, right? That she turns down Dean's advances in the shower. They're slow dancing. Nothing, happens there for a bit. It seems like she's finally, not necessarily engaging, but relenting. And you worry how far it's going to go. You worry if it's going to get physical and aggressive, and if this is going to be their blow up moment. The crazy thing is, this is not the blow up moment. There's more to
It
come. I mean, there
it's
is a blow
it's
up.
it's a blow up moment. I don't want to come across as though we're saying this is like a smaller stepping stone towards the verbal fight that they have later.
Yeah, this
This
is
is
bad.
very fucked up and bad and wrong. But I
Yeah,
understand what you're trying to say. Sorry, continue.
yeah. You wonder if this is where the relationship is going to end. This
Right.
is going to be the fight, the tiff. They're going to let it all out in this room. And there's still quite a bit more before we ultimately see that dissolution. Um, and it is an interesting contrast with, this earlier scene. Maybe it's basic storytelling, maybe it's obvious, but it is effective at showing, how much has changed since this early stage in their relationship and the present.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've both articulated our thoughts pretty well. It almost feels I don't want to appear as though we are not paying enough lip service to the scene by or appeering to like brush past it, but I think
It's hard
very
to talk about.
it's
It's
hard to
very
talk about.
cringy.
It's cringe inducing. It is, I think it would not be necessarily incorrect to call it marital rape
Yeah.
to a non to a significant to a certain degree or to a
Mm-hmm.
degree plainly. Um, so yeah, it is dicey to talk about. So I hope that we uh, paid it enough attention as far as the subject matter and also what it means in the overall story. The story itself is very clearly trying to continue drawing these as it goes on more and more intense and uncomfortable contrast between their initial courtship and where they are where they are at now. So there's also an interesting line of dialogue during the sex scene that I think because the sex scene in the future room, or uh, I guess maybe so calling it a sex scene, right? I'm realizing is maybe not the most sensitive terminology. The scene where they're, this
Attempted sex
the
scene.
the scene in the future room where they have this very uncomfortable physical interaction. How about
Yeah.
that?
Well
So
said.
so there's a line of dialogue here that I think can get lost in how uncomfortable the audience is in the moment where Dean says, "Do you want to have another baby with me?"
Mm.
And we're about to learn the kind of significance of that phrasing because back in the past, we see um, Cindy in school taking a test, kind of making the stink eye at Bobby, who is giving it right back. And then she takes a pregnancy test, and from the look on her face, seems like it's a positive test. Um, so she contemplates calling Dean. She's kind of twiddling Dean's business card in her hand, and Bobby, ever the tool, rips the business card from her hands and like takes it with him, just outright steals it, which is, pretty fucked up.
Yep.
Um, Cindy goes to Dean's place of work anyway to talk to him about the situation, and he pulls a move out of the notebook and threatens to throw himself off of a high altitude if she doesn't open up, which I guess is just like a Gosling staple.
He's a
Um,
bird,
he is a
remember.
bird. Um, so he learns that she is in fact pregnant and that it is uh, very likely not his. Um, and Gosling's reaction is pretty great. I mean, Williams is great in this scene, but Gosling's reaction I think is really interesting and well acted because he's not really he's pissed. He
Hmm.
seems frustrated with the situation, but it doesn't. It's very well acted in that it doesn't feel like he's mad at her. It seems like he's kind of mad that they have found themselves in this circumstance together. Um, and I also like in the background as she's walking away, his like repeated punching of this chain link fence.
Yeah.
Very kind of entertaining visual there. Um, what do you think about this continuation in the past of well, Bobby continuing to be the dickhead of the century, and then this reveal of the pregnancy?
Yeah. I mean, it's, uh, you know, frustrating that that character keeps coming back. I feel like every time we see him in the past, I think we're finally done with him. And then he, continues to worm his way into her life.
Bobby sucks,
He sucks. There's
and
no
Dean
redeemable qualities.
is being a total asshole at this point too, to put it
Yep.
lightly. But like, at least no, I didn't want to say that. I was going to say at least Gosling's entertaining to watch. I have nothing against the actor playing Bobby, but like, there's less meat on the bone. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's that character has one job, to be an ass, and he does it very well. Um, and this plot point didn't necessarily surprise me after having the scene, where we see Bobby and Cindy having sex, and um, without her consent, he finishes inside her, and then she's scrambling to try and to clean up. You can see she's stressed about it, so it didn't necessarily shock me that we went here in the story. Um, but it's nonetheless, I mean, it's just another really sort of tragic moment in this, in this girl's, life, between this one guy who is a total jerk to her and won't leave her alone, and this other guy who, even though she's had some loving moments with him, they, already there's some cracks in that foundation.
I mean, it's a very early stage in the relationship still, so
Yeah.
this is like quite the trial, right?
Yep.
Particularly when Dean to his coworkers, right? Not to her, so it's not like he's just spitting game to get closer to her. He's saying things like, "Oh, it feels like love at first sight. I feel like I've known her forever." So the implication there is that like these feelings are real to him, right? So
Yeah.
this revelation is very intense, and we stay in the past and we cut to these little scenes here. I think are two of my favorites in the movie. Just to preface this, um, we cut to Cindy at an abortion clinic
Yep.
where well, I say favorites. Obviously I don't mean like
Excellent. Very well done.
I don't mean like a stand up and cheer moment, Flash entering the Speed Force.
This is awesome.
I mean like wow, what a scene.
Yeah.
Um, Flash entering the Speed Force. Can you believe that shit?
That movie was
Anyway,
fine.
no, I'm saying that it got like an honorary Oscar because of the online campaign.
Oh yeah, that was funny.
That was stupid. Anyway,
Awards mean nothing.
we can't do this right now. Uh, um, Cindy at the abortion clinic. Um, I've never been to a Planned Parenthood for any reason like this, so this scene was pretty interesting to me. Um, Cindy is asked about her sexual history, and I, it's I'm almost 100% positive that the filmmakers did some consulting to make these scenes accurate, like medically
Mm,
accurate, because
mm-hmm,
I noticed in the special thanks, Planned Parenthood gets a special thanks at the end of the
mm,
credits. So my assumption would be that it's more than just them filming in an actual Planned Parenthood location. My assumption is that there was some sort of level of consultation. Um, but I was surprised here. Obviously, I'm a cisgender dude. I don't, know a lot about how this kind of uh, appointment would go. Um,
yeah.
I was kind of surprised that like one would need to. Cindy is asked about her number of sexual partners in this like screening, I guess. And I don't know. It kind of surprised me that someone would be compelled or need to divulge their number of sexual partners for any reason before getting an abortion. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
medical procedure involving a sexual organ, yeah, but like what bearing does the number of previous partners have on whether or not you can get the procedure? But regardless, we learned that Cindy has had 20 to 25 partners in her past. Kind of, I'm not passing judgment, but that is kind of an interesting piece of information to like divulge about like so like Cindy has this pattern of uh uh at least if we take Bobby and Dean
Yeah.
as like an important sample size, right? Has this pattern of like not great dudes, and we know that
Mm-hmm.
the example set by her parents and her grandparents are also not great. So it's kind of an interesting look into, obviously it is totally fine and okay if the majority of those were casual sex partners, but I would imagine that
Right.
like a not insubstantial number of those partners were like attempts at a real relationship that fell through, right? So I think I just noted that as like an interesting piece of backstory to her. Um, and again, not passing judgment in any way. I know there's tons of, Andrew Tate wannabe TikToks that are like if a woman has a body count over 3 by the time she's 50, she's trash. But like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then we also cut to we cut to Dean.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Dunn was the name of the character in Half Nelson. We cut
Right.
to Dean in the waiting room briefly, so we know that he's accompanied her,
He's there.
and then we cut to uh, a doctor about to perform uh, the procedure on Williams, or at least the first step of the procedure. And there is a big scene later that I think we talk about what the Oscar scene is, the one that they play for the real, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I think comes later for Williams, who was nominated for an Academy Award for this film.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this little sequence here, I think to me was like the Oscar scene in a lot of ways, or one of the Oscar scenes in a lot of ways. Like, as much as I said, like, I don't always lock in with Michelle Williams, depending on the performance. This scene is just like masterful from her. She the procedure begins, or it's about to begin, and she decides at the last second that she can't go through with it. Um, and this like she goes back out into the waiting room, and there's this like harrowed expression on Williams's face, clearly, taking it in just on a personal level, but also with the understanding that like she's gonna have to explain this to this guy that has gone with her, and she's just playing so many different facets of the situation at once.
Yeah.
Um, and to me, I wrote here like if I'm the person who decides on Oscars, me solely, I'm like, this is where I'm like, you know what? Yes. Um, so I'm gonna push through a little bit and then let you have
Okay.
the floor, which I keep saying, I know, but like I do think it's important to say that like um Dean immediately goes to her, and we don't see their conversation about this lack of follow through with the procedure, but he does embrace her nonetheless. And then,
Yep.
we will learn what the two decide to do afterwards. But tell me about this whole Planned Parenthood sequence in your mind. I also want to note that like it's I think the performances from the staff are quite good too.
Very good.
I don't know if they're actors or if they were medical professionals, but they seemed very realistic to me. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wondered that too. I mean, I do think this is one of the most impressive scenes of the film just because, we've seen movies where characters get abortions. We've seen movies where characters, I think go to Planned Parenthood, but we very rarely actually see the conversation that goes on in the room and then actually are sitting with the characters for part of the procedure. Now, ultimately, Cindy doesn't go through with it, but I was really impressed that we stayed with her and they actually went through part of the procedure. Like, I am going to give you this shot now. Now, I need to insert this rod. It's going to feel, like it's like you said. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was an actual doctor and nurse. The way they played it felt totally like, the way, you would see that scene go in an actual room. And it is the fear, the the confusion, the doubt that Williams is going through as a performer in that scene without being able to really say anything
Yeah,
until she finally stops it. And then you go out, like you said, we don't hear what she says to Dean. We see it from, afar. It's a really good shot from a, kind of a slight distance watching them actually
it's through
talk
the window
through the
of the Planned
window.
Parenthood. Yeah,
Yeah. So I thought this was, again, on paper, this scene may not have been all that, you know, original, right? Like, I think this is a plot point we've seen in stories before, but I thought this movie showed it so well and in a way that I thought was really unique and impressive and emotionally effective and super memorable. I do think when I think back on this movie months from now, years from now, I feel like that is one of the scenes that I will remember as a standout.
yeah, totally. And right after, totally.
Totally.
I I use that word maybe more than I should, but no, totally. I agree with you. So we see them on the bus, Dean and Cindy together. Dean now is kind of contemplating the situation and decides that they should go for it anyway and start a family together with this child. And it's a noble thing to do in these circumstances, particularly because we've seen in the present version of their relationship that the relationship doesn't seem to be going very well. And, I think that neither character, not to spoil uh, other conversations that happen in the film, I think it's notable that, like, neither character ever explicitly articulates this unplanned pregnancy as being uh, a continuing point of contention. Do you know what
Mm-hmm.
I mean? There's no blow up where he's like, um, I agreed to, raise this kid, and like it's not, and she's not even mine, and
Yeah.
there's
It
no
never
like,
goes there.
it never goes there. I think it's left to the audience's uh, interpretation, and I think it's
Mm-hmm.
heavily implied that this was, of course, a hurdle that they had to overcome and maybe haven't fully. But there is a level of maturity to each party where, um, for example, Dean is, at least with Frankie, pretty wonderful, and it seems to be very loving.
Yes.
So I think that's interesting and of note. Um, so I this is kind of an interesting. I mean, this is like basically another example of this younger version of Dean being idealistic and thinking that, well, if I believe in love at first sight and this girl is my love at first sight, then I cannot let this circumstance um, dissuade me. And I'm not saying that he should have or should not have, but do you think there's an argument for, and I'm not even saying that I would personally make this argument, do you think there's an argument for him not thinking through enough the potential ripple effects of deciding to just go for it without a more in-depth conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because again, we don't hear what they say outside the abortion clinic. Um, we don't. We cut to them on the bus. There's not a ton of dialogue in that conversation. Like there is, and we have seen a history of, I think, Dean being a bit impulsive
Mm,
as a character, whether it's deciding to book this motel. Um, and so I think it's in lockstep with his character to, I
yeah.
think, kind of jump to that seemingly noble and romantic gesture without, thinking it over too much or actually saying to the character, let's actually sit down and really talk about what this would mean and sleep on it. And I think there's this young love, you know, aspect to this story and these two characters who are in a passionate but relatively early relationship that are suddenly thrust into a very real situation. I think I think it's an interesting conversation about, you know, what they should have said, or, maybe whether or not how to go about that, right? That's a kind of big, meaty, interesting question. But I think it makes sense for the characters based on how we've seen them portrayed that they would go about it the way they did.
Yeah, that's a really good argument. I think you're correct that like it is consistent with Dean's character, like these, you know, without without a whole lot of thought, he clearly is not thinking about it, but without a whole lot
Right.
of thought, yeah, let's just go for it because we love each other, and the
Yeah.
idea that that will work itself out because, and even on a smaller scale, I think it's such a great comparison to be like, I know it's 2 hours away and you're on call for work, but let's just go to the motel and like have a romantic evening. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, but like maybe a different time because like yes, the gesture itself is romantic, but logistically, you're like lessening the meaning of the gesture by not factoring in these logical parts. You know what I mean?
Or not
Um,
even really asking if this is
yeah,
something I want to do, just suggesting it.
yeah. No, that's a totally good point. So speaking of the future room, one of our favorite locales,
Bring it back.
maybe not so much now, but
No.
in the future room, Cindy is paged to come into work, so she leaves. She leaves a note for Dean and goes on her way. Dean is woken up by the motel phone. He kind of drunkenly kind of sloshes around the room a little bit and then notices the note. Um, Back in the past, Cindy gets a message, several messages from Bobby, who is super pissed off. He swears to track down Dean and attack him. She realizes that, like, oh shit, if those messages were left X amount of time ago, he might be on his way there. She tries to warn Dean, but it's too late. Bobby and his boys have already appeared at the moving company, and frankly, they beat the shit out of poor Dean,
Yeah.
3-1. Totally not a
Not a
fair
fair
fight.
fight.
Um, and then we're kind of uh, we're kind of uh, cutting back and forth pretty rapidly now because then we go back to the present day again, where Cindy's boss um, suggests to her that when he moves his practice, she should just get an apartment in the new location rather than move her family. And it becomes clear that he's making a pass at her, and because
Ah,
he's offering to, like, when I move the practice and you get your apartment, we can still hang out and get dinner and blah blah blah. And the disappointment on Cindy's face here is so palpable.
Devastating.
She's clearly she clearly was under the impression that like she was being courted professionally, right?
Right.
Due to being a great nurse. And but she learns that she is being courted in a romantic sense from like yet another kind of
Every guy in her life.
every guy in her life is just awful, even this
Jerk.
guy. Um so we're about to get to another kind of massive moment of the movie, but I would love for you to tell me if you have any thoughts about, you know, this pager scene, or that's kind of a pretty quick bite, a quibby, if you will. And then we
Rip
go
Quibi.
rip Quibi, and then we go, the Reno 911 stuff that ended up on Quibi and is now on Roku, I think. That's pretty funny, but that's the only stuff I ever watched from Quibi. Um,
Uh-huh.
and then so tell me if you have thoughts and feelings about Bobby basically reaching his asshole apex and beating the shit out of Dean, or if you have any further thoughts. You did kind of get into how much of a dick the doctor seems to be too. But yeah, I'll just let you dig into these two pieces of shit.
I do wonder if the Bobby beating up Dean plot point was necessary. It feels, I mean, the Bobby character has proven to be a dick through and through. So it's not necessarily unrealistic that he would physically assault another person. It does veer a little bit cartoonish in a way I don't know that the movie needed. Though I guess it does make for an interesting image later on when he shows up at the house and he looks like, Rocky Balboa with
Yeah,
massive wounds all over
Shiner.
his face. Yeah, big shiner. Ultimately, I don't think that the scene and the decision to do that like hampers the movie in any way. But at this point, it's already been made very clear that Bobby is a bad person. Though I guess this could potentially explain a little bit more why Cindy behaves the way that she does in the liquor store with him later on, because not only is he verbally a threat, but we've seen him be physically violent as well. Um, and then, yeah, that doctor, oh, that was such a gut punch. The one guy,
Really?
and I mean, it was just
It's
sad to see
it's
that
it's
every
it's the
guy in her
yeah. No, I
life,
see.
has this agenda, and that the one person in her life that she may have actually respected and had a positive relationship with, even if it was just a professional one, even that is not, actually legitimate. And I mean, we've been talking about how great Williams is this whole episode, but just her delivery of that line of, I thought you wanted me because I'm a good nurse was pitch perfect. You could just really feel it in her voice when she says
Yeah,
it.
it's kind of, if I'm recalling correctly, it's like it's like deflated. It's kind of meek. It's kind of like her. Yeah, no, you know what? I take back my really, because you're right. The way that Williams plays it is a gut punch. Like I think that's a great analysis. Is that like it seems like for some cosmic reason, no dude in her life can just like be decent to her.
And the
Um,
doctor's response isn't even very good. He's not like, "Oh no, I didn't mean it like that." He's just like, "Oh, well, I gotta go. See you in the room." Like he doesn't
he
even
does it.
really try to defend himself.
He does a totally unconvincing. That wasn't meant as a pass at you, but I'm like,
Right.
I'm like, nobody believes that, dude. You're a fucking Weasley little liar, dude.
No, when someone says that wasn't meant as a pass, usually it was meant as a pass.
Um, I don't know that that's true. I certainly have put my foot in my mouth a couple times. Have I ever told you my hair story?
Probably, but I don't
This
remember it.
this has happened with two separate female friends at two separate times, both in college. And I'll do this quickly because not in defense of this doctor because he's an asshole,
I think
but
you're defending the doctor.
no, I'm not. But this is a funny story where I am socially a little bit awkward, unless it's you or Jessica. I struggle to like find a good way to just talk to people if I
Or
find myself
Anthony
in
Mackie, apparently.
or Anthony Mackie apparently. Um, so like this has happened twice. So I'm going to tell the story once and then stress that it has happened two separate times with two separate female friends
Okay.
where I will have a female friend who is in a production of Hair.
Oh, the
Um
musical.
yes. And Hair famously there are productions where the cast is nude, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this happened in college where a friend or acquaintance even was like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing a production of Hair." And because I'm like a musical theater nerd, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
person is too, my I think what is a genuine question in that conversation is, "Oh, are you guys doing the nudity?" Do you know what I
Okay.
mean?
Uh-huh.
But the way I phrased it was, "Are you doing the nudity?"
That would be awesome.
I meant you, like the production.
So, right, not
Are
you
you
specifically.
right? Are you doing the nudity?
Mm.
And she said, "Oh, I don't know. We'll have to see."
And then never
Uh,
spoke to you again.
Clearly kind of off put. Yeah, but I didn't realize in the moment that I put my foot in my mouth. So I finished it by saying, "Oh, well, I'll come check it out." Like, so the
I'll come
implication
check
being,
you out.
yeah, the implication being that like, are you guys doing the nudity? Oh, I don't know. Oh, well, I'm gonna come check it out. I meant like I like hair and I'm gonna come check
Right.
out. No, stop. I meant like I like hair and I'm going to come out. I'm going to come check out the production. Right.
Does Jess know this story?
That's what I meant. I don't know if she knows this story.
I'm excited for her to hear about it.
And then I was working at a theater camp another time over the summer where a different friend, coworker, acquaintance was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh yeah, I'm doing a production of Hair in my free time," and and I did not have the wherewithal to amend my words because in my mind it's like an innocent question. Legitimately, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
because we're both theater people, and this was not around any. I was at a theater camp, but it was totally separate from any work hours.
Yeah.
No kids around. But I was like, oh, that's interesting. Is your production doing nudity? But again, I phrased it as, oh, are you doing nudity? And, not maybe not like that, but I was like, are you doing the nudity?
Are you doing nudity?
Is the production doing the nudity? And she goes, oh, like yeah. And again, I was like, oh, I'll come check it out maybe. And I was like in the car on the way home, I was like, I should just drive off a bridge. It was so uncomfortable.
Next time someone tells you they're doing hair, just shut up.
I never saw either production. I should stress that. I didn't go
You did
see
not
either
check them
production.
out.
I did not check anything or anyone out. It's like one of my greatest, most uncomfortable moments.
That's a good bit. That should be in a movie.
Maybe someday. Anyway, let's
So this
get to like
doctor's a jerk.
this doctor is an asshole. Let's get to the big like Blue Valentine scene that people clip and put on Instagram and TikTok and everything. So,
Do they actually?
yes,
Oh, wow.
absolutely. In like sad movie compilations, I see this all the time if I'm
Good
scrolling
pick.
on like TikTok or Instagram. Um, so Dean shows up at Cindy's place of work, and we get this big. To me, this is like the Blue Valentine fight, and this is what goes in Williams's Oscar reel. But it takes a while to ramp up. Um, there's a few instances of fighting in the movie, and this is like the final climb to what is going to be the big explosion.
Yeah.
Dean is hammered. Um, they begin fighting at the workplace, at Cindy's workplace, and Cindy tries to take it outside. And it's like an uncomfortable and like realistic fight. It feels as an audience member like you're watching a couple fight in public when you like this, like, oh, I shouldn't be seeing this, you know? And
Yeah.
they're briefly able to take it into the parking lot without exploding too much in front of other people. And Cindy tries to get Dean to just drive home, even though he is drunk. So, not great. Um, and Cindy goes back inside, but Dean follows her. And this is like the widely, at least in my mind, this is like the scene that goes in Williams's Oscar reel. I'm sure if we pulled the ceremony from that year,
Mm,
I would bet money that this part is what made it in there.
yeah.
This is where they fight up. they fight up, they fight it out, and Williams like just says it point blank. She says, you know, I've got nothing left for you. There's nothing here for you. I'm so out of love with you, she says, which
Oh,
is just like
so tough.
it's heartbreaking and like, you know, as much of like a as many horrible actions and attitudes that we've seen from Dean, like this still is like so gut wrenching and like I'm just imagining if you know if a woman said this to me, how I would feel like, oh,
Hard to swallow.
it would be so difficult and like uh, that's an understatement. And then like for Dean, of course, who we know at least one point in his life was very romantic and very much about love at first sight. Um, it is just like, it's this is like it's like the iconic scene for a reason. It's so difficult to hear and watch, and things continue to get heated. The staff of the medical office tries to intervene. Dean begins to fling some things around the room. Things are getting physical, and the
Hmm.
doctor that we have talked some shit about barges in, and uh, Dean learns the doctor's name, which sets him off. We learn as an audience that the doctor, I guess, has been emailing Cindy in some sort of personal way. It's implied, like not in a professional sense, because
Yeah.
Dean says, like, you're the guy who's been emailing my wife. And Dean smacks him, essentially says, keep my wife's name out your fucking email inbox. Uh, I'm going to. And um, Ryan Gosling just smacked the shit out of me. Um,
Richard.
yeah. Uh-oh, Richard. The staff successfully gets the couple to leave. The implication is strongly now that this interaction will cost Cindy her job. Cindy in the parking lot says, I want a divorce. Gosling throws his ring into the trees. Um, Ryan, give me your take on like, I think what for my money, or at least in the, I may have talked up the Planned Parenthood scenes better,
Hmm.
but like in the broader cultural consciousness, I think this is like the Blue Valentine scene, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there are scenes earlier in the movie that I described as a train wreck. You know, are uncomfortable watching them, but at the same time, these actors are so good and they're so unpredictable and intense that you have to keep watching. I mean, if those previous scenes were train wrecks, this is like, you
The
know,
Hindenburg.
watching, yeah, this is like watching Pompeii from a distance as the volcano erupts. I mean, this is, and it keeps going. I mean, Gosling, you think he's going to walk out. He goes back, he goes behind the desk. You know, there's this poor coworker who's trying to calmly tell him to leave and calmly talk to Cindy about what's going on, check in on her.
And
She's
that's
thrown
just,
in the middle of
yeah.
this.
And that's just agitating him more because he's
Right.
like, what does this random woman know about my relationship? Is what he's going through his mind. Yeah, it's like, you're right. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
And he doesn't look like $1 million. He's got his glasses on, his hair is a mess, he's got this weird shirt on. You know, the coworker immediately recognizes that he's probably drunk. Dr. Feinberg, you know, gets physically assaulted. This is all happening in Cindy's place of work. You know, how is she going to be able to go back to the office after something like this happens? And then I think it's a perfect coda that she finally says, I
Well,
want a divorce.
This is Blue Valentine. This isn't Coda. What do you?
Very funny. I haven't
That's
seen
another
Coda.
Oscar nominee, Oscar winner. I haven't seen it
Yes,
either. Sorry.
honest
Go ahead.
mistake. The same movie.
Go ahead.
Um, you know, she wants a divorce. He throws the ring and then he throws it impulsively and immediately seems to regret it and goes to look for it.
And
Um,
doesn't seem like he can find it.
no, it doesn't seem like he can find it. And Cindy's just standing there because, you know, she's his ride. So it's just this awkward moment after this brutal, very loud, you know, physical fight. Um, and yeah, I mean, I could see why this would be on a million TikToks and Instagrams. Um, Gosling's going for it, but it feels earned and makes sense with the character. It doesn't feel like hammy or, takes me out of the realism of the scene in any way. And it's just a very sad, you know, ending to these two characters.
Well,
It's not the
it's not
ending.
quite the ending, but it's, in many ways it might as well be. And I love
Yeah.
that you pointed out the tossing of the ring and then the subsequent going to try to find it, because I mean, what a perfect encapsulation of just this guy
Yeah.
as a whole, right? Like impulsively throwing the ring in that moment of anger, and then immediately recognizing that, like, even if she means that she wants the divorce, like this symbol of their love is important to him, and he
Yeah.
tries to go to find it, but you can't just undo any decision that you make
Right.
because of the immediate consequences, right? Which I think in many ways is a lot of what Dean's major flaw is. So
Yeah.
I love that you pointed that out. Um, and we do actually, after this, cut to a scene that you talked about earlier in the past of Dean meeting Cindy's family for the first time, going to a family dinner,
Mm-hmm.
and Cindy is I think she feels a little bad because Dean shows up with some battle scars from his row with Bobby, and the family, Cindy's family, learns that Dean. They learn a little bit about him, as do we. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he never finished high school, he says, which some people don't. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but
No.
the vibe is that maybe the family doesn't really think he's totally worthy of their daughter, who is planning to study medicine and become a doctor. We learned that, probably because of the unplanned pregnancy, etc. She only rises to the level of nurse, but, still doing pretty well for herself in that regard. And we
Mm-hmm.
also learn here that Dean's parents divorced when he was quite young, which is, of course, um, probably making the events that are happening in the present even harder for him emotionally, um, and kind of, I think, colors his character in an interesting way. Like, we learn that Dean did not have a model of a healthy relationship necessarily growing up. So I
Yeah.
think there's a fear and despair in the idea that his relationship will fail. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in his adulthood, which is not uncommon for children of divorce. My parents are no longer together. I have a non-zero level of anxiety, as much as I think, my current relationship is wonderful, and we've been
Mm-hmm.
dating for so long that, like, because of that upbringing, and I'm not passing judgment on either of my parents individually, but like there is a non-zero uh part of me that's like that has that fear, right? Because that's what
Mm-hmm.
I watched growing up, right? So I don't think that's uncommon. Um and then upstairs after the dinner, um Dean says that, oh, uh he thinks nobody will be good enough for Cindy, but if that's the case, then he wants the job, which is a very sweet thing to say.
Yeah.
Um they cuddle in bed, and Dean plays their song for her, the song that we heard earlier in the motel. Um, and this little needle drop hits like a gut punch, because now we know where the relationship is at currently. This song is, at one time in their lives, a uniting element in their love, and now in the present, or at least when we saw it in the present day, it's not nearly as effective, right? It still creates a little bit of a spark, but that is not enough to, like, repair the damage that has been done throughout the course of their relationship from the beginning to now. Um, give me your thoughts on the dinner scene where we learn a little bit more about Dean's backstory. It's coming very late in the film. Do you think it's too little, too late, or do you think it's an interesting choice?
No, I like that it's dropped in without feeling, too forced, in the sense that, oh, we're going to reveal this information so that you understand even more why certain things have happened. I think it feels natural enough in the conversation at the meal with the family. What I really get out of, this little bit is, that final moment with them in the bed when they're listening to the song. I think it goes to show this idea of, timeline jumping in movies done right, like the impact that that can have when it's done well, is this idea of, learning information later on that makes tidbits in previous scenes make more sense and be more meaningful. And when you finally understand their meaning and it hits you harder than it would have otherwise, the fact that we're learning this right after this brutal scene where she's, calling for a divorce and they're yelling at each other in this very public fight. I think it makes that scene more impactful than it would have been had it, just been earlier in the movie, um, at a random moment, or had this been um, a chronological timeline, throughout.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting in that, like, I mean, this is a element of Dean that I think you can easily pick up on throughout the course of the film, but this is another kind of definitive uh, feather in that cap. Is like there is kind of a sense that you get throughout the course of the movie that maybe he does not feel worthy of her in a lot of ways, and I think that plays into a lot of the dynamic when it comes to um his like his desire to like feel loved and appreciated. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and this dinner scene kind of drives it home even further, where like he does not come from he didn't finish high school, he's not super well educated, and even when they meet earlier in the film, not that these jobs are not valuable, but he is working at a moving company as she is studying to become a doctor, right? So
Right. Different levels of ambition.
yeah, and not that you can't be a super ambitious
No.
dude who works in a moving company, but there is kind of a sense throughout that like maybe he does feel insecure about being worthy of her and things like that, and in his lesser moments he lets that frustration out of being like, well, I'm good to you and I'm good to our daughter, and I am working every day and doing X, Y, and Z. So like, why can't you just like love me in the way that I want to be loved, right? And it's just not that easy, or not that simple. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we do go back to the present. Dean and Cindy go to pick up Frankie, and they kind of just go right into the house. They leave Grandpa outside with Frankie,
Locked him out of
um,
his own
and lock
house.
him out of his own house. They have a more measured conversation inside. It's still, very difficult and very sad, but the it's not tinged with the same degree of anger that the other one was.
Right.
Um, Grandpa, I noted, even says leave her alone as Dean follows Cindy into the house, a further confirmation that like uh their fights are maybe more common than other couples is
And known to be not very pleasant.
known to be not very pleasant. Um this is just like another further heartbreaking scene of theirs. There's just like it becomes clear here that there's just like a fundamental disconnect somewhere. Cindy says, we're not good together. I can't stop. You can't stop. And this is like uh, basically an assertion that like sometimes a general love for one another is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that given other circumstances, which is like a very sad but terrible reality, it becomes apparent that uh, at least according to Cindy, and I think as the audience at this point, we are meant to side with her, that
Mm-hmm.
these two just aren't compatible in the way that they need to be for their respective uh, mental healths and the well-being of their daughter. Um, And then we go back to the past briefly, another very purposeful intercut. We see Dean and Cindy's wedding. They are over the moon and happy, or I don't know if it's a capital W wedding, but they are getting married. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it looks like they went to the courthouse or some, something smaller.
Yeah, and they're just over the moon and happy, and the movie is just like twisting the knife into you as you're
Yeah.
watching these final moments because we now know that, or it's implied, I guess, this is what I drew from this, that like had they been afforded different circumstances, they might have ended up in a better place in, I guess, if we're assuming 2010 is the present day, the present day. Um, but this, um, I guess, impulsiveness on Dean's part, the situation of the unplanned pregnancy kind of forced the relationship along a different path, a fast track
Hmm.
in certain respects. Um, so we intercut between the wedding and the present, and in the past, they are in tears of joy as they say their vows to each other or as they get married, and in the present, they are crying because their relationship is coming to this tragic end. And then Dean walks off into the evening, fireworks blaring on the street. Happy 4th of July, everyone. Um,
Woo.
that's the end of Blue Velvet. Blue Velvet.
Valentine.
Damn it. See, I did it. That's the end of Blue Valentine. Um, give me your thoughts on this ending. It's such a downbeat. Like we talked about the last episode we recorded was Half Nelson, which has a lot of down moments, but I think ends ultimately sort of hopeful. Um, not so much here, man. What do you think about this ending, this fight that they have in Grandpa's house, which I think it's occurring to me now, like kind of interesting that you're talking about them connecting in her bedroom in the past, right? This
Hmm.
is the same house. They're in the same house having this terrible conversation, years later. This final, less angry exchange that they have, this glimpse into their wedding, like just give me your personal breakdown here.
Yeah, I mean seeing them in a moment of happiness where they are, legally and symbolically committing to each other, right, in sickness and in health, and the idea of spending the rest of your lives together as we're seeing them make the decision, to no longer do that, to end that agreement is definitely a twisting of the knife. I think that's a good way to put it. Um, and I like that while it's still tense and heightened, it is a quieter conversation as opposed to the kind of blowout at the um, hospital. And I think there's a great moment where Gosling says something along the lines of, we don't want our daughter to, come from a broken family. I think it gives you some insight into his perspective. As you mentioned earlier, for all his faults, we've seen him be a pretty loving, engaged father. And so I think there's this, sense of desperation on his end to, if anything else, stick together for the sake of their daughter, which ultimately makes the kind of last gut punch of the movie, where as he's walking away, their little daughter, goes after him, and tries to play with him and grab him and pull him back. And, she's, struggling to understand what's going on. And he has to send her back and turn around and walk away from her. It just really gives you a last kind of kick in
Kicking
the
the kicking the
what's.
balls.
Yeah, before then cutting to these fireworks on this, again, symbolically, exciting day, and all these other families and kids and people out and about, happy and celebrating. So, and I love that, to kind of steal from something I was saying about The Notebook in our first episode, the movie just ends. Like there's no cut to, 5 years later where we're seeing them in their new lives, or
Oh, like
some.
I like this film. Well, I like this filmmaker's films, I should say, but like, it's not like there's not like a Woody Allen ending where it's like, I saw Cindy 5 years later at a cinema.
Yeah.
She
There's
seemed
not
good. She was with
there's
a different guy. Yeah, there's nothing like
there's not
that.
an epilogue, or some time jump where it's like the daughter as a grown woman now, like, you know,
That was the
thinking
last
about
time I saw my father.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Like again, a more conventional, I think, predictable movie could have, thrown that on at the end. And, this movie lets you sit with, the end of this marriage, but in a lot of ways, still the uncertainty of, what's going to happen to these people as far as co-parenting and how they're going to be able to coexist, at all as parents and people now that they're no longer together.
yeah. That's a pretty good assessment. I don't disagree with. And we haven't really talked about the young actress playing Frankie at all.
Frankie,
And
she's good.
I'm pretty harsh on child actors a lot of the time, just because frankly I believe that sometimes they're not very good. But this girl is cute, and I think very good in what is asked of her. Um, so I'm going to segue into us giving our final thoughts on the movie and our rating. And just as a reminder for you, well, I'm going to remind you of our rating scale. Um,
Please do.
and then after that, I'm going to remind you that, and this will be subject to change at your discretion at the end of the miniseries, but uh, for you to also rank this personally for you in the films that we've covered thus far. Um, so our rating scale, however, so give me your final thoughts and then your rating. Our rating scale
Mm-hmm.
is: this movie is a Helena Bonham farter. This
Mm.
movie is Gail Garcia Bernal. Uh,
Poor Gail.
yeah, yeah, it's cool. I do like Gail Garcia Bernal. Um, After that, we've got Yeah, it's cool. I'd see this movie a second time.
Yeah.
Um, Next after that, we've got I don't just like this movie. I Jennifer Love Hewitt. And then at the tippy top of the scale, we've got this movie is a G.I. Jane 2. I can't wait to see it. Oh, that was a nice one. I'm here. Uh-oh, Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me. Maybe eventually I'll stop reciting that every time, but I just want to make sure that any viewers we've accrued are familiar with the scale if they drop in for the first time on this particular episode. So, Ryan, give me your overall final thoughts on Blue Valentine, not Blue Velvet, and your rating and your ranking in the miniseries thus far, which, of course, at the end, you are allowed to change as you see fit.
I think this movie would be on my list of movies that I think are phenomenal, but would never want to see again.
Sorry, I
And
just coughed. Go ahead.
and bless you or cough you. Um, and not because the movie isn't you know worth rewatching, but it's just so sad and downbeat. I don't know if this is a movie I would, go back to all that often, on a Saturday night looking for something to watch. Let's throw in some Blue Valentine. Or, if I'm on a date night, I don't think I would pull this one out.
Not to demonstrate how sensitive you are, you wouldn't watch Blue
I
Valentine?
love this movie. I'm a sensitive man. Um, yeah, I was really, really moved. By this one. This was I've been workshopping this take. I texted this to you earlier in the week. These are different movies, but the subject matter is similar. And I know you really like this movie.
Oh,
I think it's fine.
I'm curious. Yeah, go ahead.
This to me, and it's not a one-to-one comp, but this to me is far better and more impactful than Marriage Story.
Oh, okay. I do really, really like Marriage Story. I would push back because I think
I guess that one's more about the aftermath of the
exactly.
divorce.
Marriage Story is about, yeah, it's a significant portion of Marriage Story is, after the fact, after the
Yeah.
divorce. But I understand what you're going for.
The
Um,
bickering of the couples made me think of those two movies, together. But I would give this a rating of I don't just like it, I Jennifer Love Hewitt. And I did seriously consider going to the GI Jane, but
Really? Wow.
but
Okay.
it's just so sad and downbeat that I think I'd have to sit with it. And I'm curious to see if time goes on, like if this movie sticks with me. And as I think about it more, like if my thoughts about it will change. But at the very least, Jennifer Love Hewitt. Um, and then for my personal rankings, this is number one with a bullet. I would rank this notably higher than number two, Half Nelson, which I still really liked, and then number three, The Notebook, which is fine. But this would be my top choice of the three that we've watched for this podcast so far.
Okay. This is going to be interesting.
Boom.
This is going to be interesting. So, let me I'm trying to figure out how to articulate my final thoughts
Uh oh.
in a way that I'm not just like repeating myself from earlier, but I think this movie is like I think it's kind of smarter than some people might give it credit for. Like, it obviously the performances are great and it's clever with how it draws the parallels and everything. But for whatever reason, I kept going back to like, why is this set at 4th of July? And like,
Mm.
and like, it can't just be because the term fireworks with somebody is like a you know a euphemism for
Yeah.
intense love, right?
Right.
It's not, but it's set around the 4th of July and stuff. And I keep going back to what I said earlier about their first, like, the dinner scene that they have. Where like maybe I'm just getting too hung up on this, but Dean says his life is quote unquote the dream, like I said earlier. And
Mm-hmm.
I think not only does this have a lot to say about how people work in interpersonal relationships, but like about how just relationships work, period, in the world, and in just how they have to function in the society that we've set up, and whether or not it obviously there are people who are in happy relationships, right? But I think this is like positing that there is so much stacked against the idea of this movie, of this idealized movie love that exists out there. There's so much stacked against the potential success of that, in reality, right? Dean is very
Right.
idealistic and just can't seem to jumpstart that kind of romance, um, or sustain it, rather. Um, and like I said earlier, it's like they're both so limited by circumstance. You know, Dean is trying to convince himself, or has convinced himself, that, he goes to work at his job, and even though he's drinking at 8 in the morning, that's not an issue. And like, he's going to work and making money, and he comes home and he's a good father to their child. And so why isn't his wife meeting him with what is supposed to be the like nuclear housewife level of love and admiration, right?
Mm-hmm.
um which I think is so interesting and bold for a film to explore in a lot of respects. And then, like I said earlier, it's like they do have on the surface this nuclear unit. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are both employed. They have a daughter who seems happy and healthy, and but this gnawing, depressing idea at the heart of this movie that like, God forbid if you have that unit and you're still unhappy, you're still not fulfilled for some reason. What is the solution to that? Is there a medicine for that is not self-destructive or harmful to those around you? And it doesn't really provide an answer. and
No.
and the answer is that, or the answer that it, posits as it posits one answer, I should say, is that the answer is that no, there is not a solution to this problem.
Hmm.
Sometimes you can have love for this other person, but due to sheer circumstance or disconnect or what have you, that love that may exist and be real is just plain not enough. And that is so sad. And it's realistic, but
Yeah.
it's very sad. So, as far as rating, I don't, that being said, this is so hard because I just spent, I just spent the entire episode basically glazing this movie and saying how much I think what it does works, but there's something about it that is like keeping it from reaching the upper like echelon for me. And I don't and I
Really?
and I don't and I don't really know what that is. Um
This is very shocking.
yeah, I love sad movies. I love like love on film even if it's not, you know, if it's, you know, super romantic all the way through or otherwise. I just think that's interesting subject matter.
Hmm.
And I think this movie's great. I understand why Williams was nominated for an Oscar. I think maybe it's just like maybe some of it is just like I know this kind of like independent film romance vibe, and maybe there are just other films in that vein that I find more effective or more uh that speak more to me for whatever reason.
Hmm.
Like maybe what I'm trying to say is this is really affecting and emotional, and I like the performances, and I think it's smart. And I still, for whatever reason, don't connect to it personally with experiences from my life.
Hmm.
Which to
That's
me,
fair.
if a movie is going to be like at the tippy top or like an all timer, it's got to speak to me on that extra level where, for some cosmic reason, it connects with my personal life, values, beliefs, um, experiences in ways that other films just simply don't, which is not something that is necessarily quantifiable, right? Like a movie either does that or it doesn't. We talked about The Greatest Showman briefly.
Mm.
For whatever reason, a movie that I find detestable and just plain bad for whatever reason,
For whatever
for
reason.
whatever reason, hits you very hard.
Yeah.
There's something inside of you personally that for all of that movie's, one could argue
Responds to Hugh Jackman riding that elephant.
there's something within that movie, another Michelle Williams movie, that
Mm.
for some reason connects with you inside on a personal level that elevates the whole thing despite what I would argue are very objective flaws. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So
Yeah.
conversely, despite this movie's very objective strengths, there's something that just keeps it from being like 5 stars with a bullet. I hope I articulated that well.
You did.
So for me, this is a yeah, yeah, it's cool. I'd see this movie a second time, which I don't literally mean this movie is.
Right.
I don't
Right
lit.
away.
I don't literally mean this movie is like infinitely rewatchable, but I mean
And
that like
cool.
for me, it's like yeah, for me, it's like this is like a really solid, great movie. Like to drop the veil of the rating system for a second, if we do treat it numerically, like I would say this is probably we're not doing half stars, we're not doing stars period. But for me, this would be like a really, really strong, emphatic 3.5.
That's acceptable.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas other times, there's a difference between a soft 3 and like a solid 3.5. You know what I
Right.
mean? There's a very wide chasm between those two ratings. Um, so as far as rankings with what we've already seen, um,
I'm
this
a little
would be,
nervous.
I think, just because the other two, Half Nelson, I find so intellectually stimulating, apart from being very compelling. That's number one for me, I think.
Okay,
Um,
that's fine.
I was just so shocked by how much that movie had to say and how it subverted my expectations. And I'm so sorry, Ryan.
Don't do it. Don't
I
do it.
I just think because it's the best version of what it is
It's not.
and more rewatchable. Not that rewatchability is the only thing that matters, but I feel like I could throw it on at any time and have a decent time. I think I put the Notebook at 2 and then Blue Valentine is right under. But that's because I really like and enjoy all three films, whereas you are a lot softer on the Notebook. So having it at 3 for you, we're talking about chasms, right? For you, the
Hmm.
gap between 2 and 3 is way bigger for me than for me. Like for me, it's 1, 2, 3, and all of these movies are awesome. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I'm sorry. That's where I'm at right now.
It's
And
your opinion.
by the end of the miniseries, I may change that. Um, so, and maybe it's because we do see, I think the romantic chemistry between Gosling and McAdams is more, and it is because the movie is very, very invested in being as lovey as possible when they are in love.
Hmm.
Um, I think the chemistry works a little bit better for me there compared to Gosling and Williams.
Interesting.
That's just my personal opinion.
All right.
Um,
I have to respect that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, so I'm glad that this ended up in Gosling's known for because otherwise I don't know that I ever would have gotten around to it. What about you?
Yeah, I don't think I would have picked it for my own three, and I don't know that this would have been anywhere near the top of my list of movies to prioritize watching. So, but I'm absolutely thrilled that I've now seen it and can talk to people about it. Um, it's fascinating that this is in his top four. I think it makes sense in the sense that it seems like people really do respond to this movie, and it I think was considered well liked and successful enough at the time. But again, it's another movie where Gosling is playing a very complicated, often not very likable guy, and doesn't even have his beautiful set of hair for a significant portion of the movie.
Yeah, and that was a gripe that I had for sure. So speaking of complex Gosling characters, well, thank you for joining me, Ryan.
You're welcome.
I was very interested in breaking down this film with you, um, and I'm kind of touched that it worked for you so deeply. I don't think of you as being very outwardly emotional, so I'm glad that we got into that a little bit. Um,
Full of love,
Full of love, a lot of love to give.
except for La La Land, but we'll talk more about that
Don't
later.
don't shit talk La La Land right now. I'm trying to wrap things up. You're trying to get me to go on for another hour and a half defending La La Land against you, a fucking hater. Anyway, speaking of reserved, speaking of reserved, maybe toxic question mark?
Oh,
Men? No, I don't know that that's a decent argument for this. Next time, if my calculations are correct, Ryan, we're going for a drive.
oh, oh, that's exciting.
Exactly. So, probably one of the most film bro movies ever made.
Let's embrace our inner film, bro.
We got our sensitivity out on the Blue Valentine. We got our intellectual side out on the Half Nelson. We got one out for the girlies right away with the Notebook. Next time, this one's for the boys.
For the
okay?
boys. Let's hear it for the boys.
Let's hear it for the boys. We're real human beings and real heroes. Tune in next time for Drive. And until then, try not to let the hairline recede too much, fellas. It can be
Please.
distracting. Bye.
Bye.